Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Female Deku Awakens Saiyan Quirk? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Author note, character information sheet. Character 1, Midoriya Izuku, Midoriya Izuka, placeholder. Personality, same as canon. Analytical, kind, compassionate, and heroic to the bone. Is highly empathetic and loves helping others to the point it actually hurts themselves. Highly regarded by Class 1A to be their emotional center in canon. In this story, Izuka will be regarded as the quiet, compassionate, kind, analytical hero fangirl. She also stutters a lot in the beginning portions of the story, so please do not ask for me to change this, it will leave over time. Height. In canon, Midoriya Izuku is stated to be standing at a height of 5 foot in this story. Specifically, the female counterpart of him, Midoriya Izuka, is standing at a height of 5 feet 3 inches. She is a few inches shorter than in canon. That is all I will change in terms of her height. Appearance. She has medium-length curly forest green hair that reaches the middle of her back. She wears mostly baggy clothing to hide her physique due to personal opinions about her body. She is physically strong when entering UA, strong thighs, wide hips, and a built torso. She has wide emerald, green eyes that are extremely expressive. Body type. As for most of my stories featuring a female Midoriya Izuku, she will be holding a very voluptuous frame. Not because I specifically like that in a female character, but to contrast to her actual abilities. She has a large bust just below Yaoyorozu Momo, but in between Melissa Shield and Ishido Mina, and her hips are wide with muscle. Her thighs are where her true power comes from, seeing as how they are thick with muscle, but due to a health condition it looks soft. Health condition, lipedema. This is the condition where certain fat stores in the body cannot be broken down through any and all kinds of physical training. Izuka doesn't know she has this condition at first until she realizes that in all the training she's done with Bardock she hasn't appeared to have grown any muscle. Relationship with Bardock. She views him as a stranger at first, then it evolves into him becoming her mentor, teaching her how to become a very critical fighter, and very brutal at that. But she doesn't like how harsh his worldview is, and he appropriates her training to suit that. By the time she enters UA University, she will view him more akin to a father than her actual biological father. Summary of her life. Born to Midoriya Inko and Midoriya Hisashi, Midoriya Izuka, name pending, was living a good life until she reached the age of 4. It was the day she was supposed to get a quirk, and after a year of not getting one, her mother took her to the family doctor. Dr. Tsubasa, Dr. Garaki Daruma Ujiko. After he tells them that she should give up, Izuka spends the rest of the next 14 years being bullied and harassed by Bakugo and his cronies. It isn't until the worst day of her life that she meets Bardock as he appears on Dagoba Municipal Beach Park that everything in her life changes for the better. Quirks and potential ones acquired. None. She will not be getting a quirk at all in this story. As much as I would love to give her one, I just can't do it. In this story, the kind of power she will be learning how to use is ki, energy. Bardock will teach her, after healing from his wounds, how to utilize it enough for the UA entrance exams, and by the time she gets back from the entrance exams he will teach her how to utilize ki in order to fly. Power scaling. Now you all might be wondering, how will I even power scale her correctly? Specifically, because of how strong Bardock really is compared to the entire world of My Hero Academia. I'm not really much of a fan when it comes to power scaling, not because I don't like it, but mainly because of the fanbase who are really into it. I don't really like doing power scaling due to how I can sometimes make characters do things that shouldn't be within their power. But these are the power levels she will be capable of using early into the story. Another set of power levels will be given at a later point in the story BTW. Izuka's power levels. Before Bardock's training, PL2. After Bardock's training, PL 85. After entrance exams, learning flight PL 103. After battle training, PL 115. Before USJ incident, PL 135. After USJ incident, PL 150. Before Sports Festival, PL 180. After Sports Festival, PL 200. I will not be giving power levels for any other characters aside from Bardock, but for him it will all remain the same. But just to let you all know, I will be using his canonical power level before he enters the MHA universe, specifically because that is the only stated power level we know about him. What with him being at a power level of 10, anywho, let's move on to the next character. Character 2, Bardock, DBS. Personality. He is the same as the DBS canon. The Saiyan man is very caring towards his family. A trait that is not heard of with most Saiyans, but he shows a level of uncaring when it comes to Raditz. I'm not sure whether or not it was because Raditz was already off-world, but Bardock never really states that he cared for Raditz, so I'm leaving it at this. He's uncaring, but at the same time warms up to the Midoriya family due to how kind they are. It reminds him of Jine, who his mate before had been coming to Earth in the MHA universe. Appearance. He wears a beige, tan-colored armor, a red bandana over his forehead, and is muscular. He has a scar on his cheek from a previous battle that had happened previously before returning to planet Vegeta. He wraps his tail around his waist because he's long since learned how to protect it, and he doesn't need to fear about having to lose control during Great Ape. He is constantly in a serious expression, either due to how he lived as a soldier for the Saiyan army or the Frisia force, it's unknown. But he is always holding a serious expression on his face. Height. Bardock's canonical height is stated to be around 5 feet 9 inches, but for this story I want to bump that up to an even 6 feet. Not because I think he's short, but mainly because I don't think he'd like being called short by other people when he arrives in the MHA world. He's a grown-up man and he doesn't need to be talked to as though he were a student or child. Not to mention he's not below committing murder in order to get back at someone who talks shit about him. Body type. He is a very muscular person, but due to his training he's attained a lot of scars. Especially when it came to his missions, his musculature has shown that he has put a lot of training into keeping his physique. But he's not overly muscular like Endeavor or All Might, who train their entire lives with their quirks in order to appear as though they are extremely muscular. Same for the villain Muscular. Think of a watered-down All Might in his prime and just slim out the muscles from there and you got Bardock's body type. Relationship with Izuku and her mother. With Izuku, he views her as a potential enemy at first. But over time, he decides to take her on as a student in order to teach her how to defend herself. After that, they get a lot closer to the point that when Izuku is leaving for UA University, she refers to him as Dad, and he can't help but feel pride at that. As for Inko Midoriya, you all saw the tag. I plan on making those two enter a relationship on the side whilst training Izuku. As for how I'm going to do that, that is for me to know and you all to find out. But just to let you all know, it will be on the down low for their relationship status. Life story. Bardock spent all 42 years of his life fighting for the Saiyan army. When he was just 3 years old, he had been sent to a planet in order to make their race submit to Saiyan rule. It only took about 5 days and a great ape transformation to do it. At the time he only had a power level of by the time he was 17 he had gotten into multiple Saiyan tournaments to prove that strength is proven through harsh training and won at least 3 of those tournaments. He had successfully blown up his first planet by the time he reached 21, with his power level of around, and only months later met Jine, the mate he soon closed doors with. By the time he reached the age of 30 he had a child with Jine and named them Raditz. His relationship with the boy was distant due to his work under Lord Frisia. But it wasn't until around 8 years later that his second son was born, Kakarot. He made sure that when Frisia came to planet Vegeta that Kakarot would be sent to a backwater planet called Earth. This is 3 years after Kakarot was born. By the time he was dying to Frisia's attack, he had reached the age of power scaling. His canonical power level is 10, it's never stated to go up after that, but there are movies that portray him reaching a level of power to transform into a Super Saiyan, story of Bardock. So it isn't officially stated whether or not that Bardock is actually canon to the actual source material, so I will state that from the moment he enters the MHA universe, from the moment he dies, he will plateau at a power level of 13, or at least until the plot requires for him to have trained enough to gain a power boost. Bardock power level. Before planet Vegeta is destroyed by Frisia. PL 10,000. After planet Vegeta is destroyed by Frieza, PL 10,000. After appearing on Dagobah Municipal Beach Park, PL 500 and dropping due to injuries. After recovering from injuries, PL 13,300. Plateau after Izuku heads for U, PL 13,300. These are the power levels I plan on doing for the moment. Any other power levels that come out in the story are for those specific moments and arcs. Please do not ask me about certain power levels after this point because I do not like writing them down. Especially since I have to do the mental gymnastics of how to calculate how a certain character gets a boost in power and other stats. But aside from that, this is all the information that I plan on releasing to you all on the story at the moment. This is a spreadsheet about character information, not anything related to the future chapters as of this moment. After this is posted, I will begin work on the first actual chapter of the story, so please keep yourselves waiting for when that comes out. And I hope you all enjoy your Christmas time this year. From what I hear, it might be a good one. Anywho, I'll leave you all at that. The reason why I didn't state who Izuku will be getting into a relationship with for the story is because I am leaving it all up to you readers. So leave a comment down below for who you wish to see enter a relationship with her. And subsequently earn the prideful scorn of Bardock when he finds out the girl he raised to be a warrior is going to mate with later on down the line. Planet Vegeta's atmosphere, Universe 7, age 737. I expected the cold embrace of the afterlife or the searing heat of hell. Instead, the universe tore open like a fresh wound. As the fire of the supernova vanished, it was replaced by the scent of salt and the sound of crashing waves. I realized the vision hadn't just shown me my son's future, it had stolen me from my own death. The call to return back to planet Vegeta was heard by any and all Saiyans who were away from the home planet. Bardock had been finishing up a mission near one of the many planets deep in the core of South Galaxy when he returned with Beat. The Saiyan man was looking wiry and scared the entire time, especially since Lord Frieza wasn't one for calling all forces back to their home planet for anything. Bardock sat in the seat next to the nervous Saiyan, his expression calm but completely hiding the true feelings of the Saiyan man from his ally. Beat may have been a good Saiyan friend of his, but that didn't deny the fact that his original squad had been killed earlier. They had taken on an entire planet alone and he found their dead bodies lying across it when he finished their remnants. It was when he himself had gotten the call from the Frieza Force to return back to planet Vegeta. Beat had been in the same area when he got picked up. Bardock placed a palm under his chin as he thought about the timing of this kind of event. It was too lined up with some destruction events in the past that Frieza took part in. Frieza wasn't stupid. When he wanted to get rid of something, he made sure their entire race was on the planet. And as much as Bardock was not willing to die, he knew for a fact that he wouldn't be capable of speaking to the king about his thoughts. It was a bad feeling in his gut that caught him looking at the sky of the Saiyan home planet. The sky was filled with reds and blues, something that usually gave him peace of mind. But this time it felt as though they were holding a breath for what was to come in what Bardock hoped wasn't going to be a few hours. Are you sure that we shouldn't worry about what could happen today? Beat asked, concerned. If Frieza wanted to get rid of us, he would have done so when he came here with his father. Our combined might would have been child's play against them. Bardock said as he sat upright in his seat. Sure, but I'm more worried about the Saiyan children. They're innocent. If planet Vegeta were to be destroyed, why would he kill innocent children? Beat questioned. Don't ask me. All I know is that I feel as though something big is happening today. I am going to make sure my son is taken off-world in order to keep him safe. Bardock said as Beat stared at him. Really? Are you sure that you'll be able to get him off-world? Beat asked, curious. I'll send him off the planet from the other side. That way Frieza wouldn't see it if he's coming to destroy us all. Bardock said as the ship landed in the landing field. Well, I guess I should see Paragus. He's been raving about how powerful his son has been. Beat said, garnering Bardock's attention. What's his power level? Bardock asked, curiously. He keeps stating that it's over 10,000. Beat said as Bardock blinked at that. That means he's a Saiyan mutant. Huh, never thought that Paragus lineage of Saiyans would breed a power of 10,000 plus. Bardock said, stretching his limbs. Climbing out of the ship, Both Bardock and Beat split apart from one another as Bardock took in the smells. It was filled with metal and blood, but at the same time it was mixed with sweat of hard-working Saiyans moving about their days. A small, rare smile appeared on his face as he thought that this was the smell of home, but when he looked high into the sky, directly towards the sun, he could have sworn he saw a multitude of ships slowly moving towards the planet. He didn't know whether his eyes were playing with him in that moment, but he decided to just follow his gut. It was never wrong. He walked through the shopping district of Planet Vegeta. He noticed a familiar scent in the air. Moving over to a nearby meat shop, he knocked on the door and it opened up to reveal his mate, Jine. She happily hugged him tight, her tail wrapping around his own as she happily spoke to him about how her day was. Bardock's expression softened even more as he stared down at Jine as she happily spoke to him. She even spoke about how Kakarot was waking up soon, especially since he'd been in the small pod for a few years by now and he was ready to exit it. Jine, I know that you're happy right now, but I need to speak to you in an area where no one can hear us. Bardock said, his tone serious. Jine nodded at him as she placed her palm on the pod, Bardock doing the same as they watched Kakarot reciprocate their action. Bardock and Jine smiled at Kakarot as the baby floated in the small pod before leaving the room and moving to a nearby forest. Standing alone with one another, they stared up at the sky as Bardock saw the very same ships he'd seen earlier high in the sky hiding behind the sun again. Jine had been staring at him in worry, seeing as how Bardock hadn't even spoken a moment further since bringing her all the way out here, and she was getting antsy. Bardock, can you please tell me what's going on? I'm very scared right now and you're not helping things. Jine pleaded with him. Frisia's coming to destroy Planet Vegeta. Bardock said, suddenly causing her to pause. What? Jine questioned, blinking. I can see his ships hiding within the sun's rays. I'm not a rocket scientist, but I sure as hell know for a fact that Frisia's main use of hiding within the sun is to prevent those whose planets he plans on destroying seize his approach. Bardock said, as Jine cringed. Why do you think he'd destroy Planet Vegeta now of all times? We've worked hard for him for years. Jine asked as Bardock glared at her. He's always shown a very irritated hatred of us whenever we report to us. You know how he's always speaking to us as though we're beneath him. Bardock scolded her in a soft tone. I know, it's just hard to think that he'd take out his most prized warriors. We've worked hard for him without even questioning him, same for King Cold. Jine said, moving a hand through her spiky hair. We need to send Kakarot off the planet. Bardock said, as Jine stared at him in shock. What? She called out. If I am wrong then we can go pick him back up and bring him back. But until I know for sure that Planet Vegeta is safe, I cannot risk keeping my youngest son on the planet. Bardock said, glaring at the ground. His hands clenched as he felt the air fill itself with ozone and the lingering sensation of overwhelming power. Jine moved next to him, tears in her eyes as she hugged him tight before nodding at him. She didn't voice her own disbelief at his decision, but there wasn't anything she could feasibly even say to refute his claims. Each and every time he had a gut feeling something bad was happening, it always happened, and she was glad for it. But to feel as though she has no chance of seeing her son for the rest of his life, it hurt her deeply. Unknown to her, Bardock was hurt by his own words as well. It just was perfectly hidden behind a heavy mask of indifference. It wouldn't be until deep into the night that Bardock and Jine would get their son into a space pod. He would be seen wearing his armor inside of the pod as he stared up at them with confusion and worry, his hands being placed on the window of the spacecraft staring up at them both. Bardock looked on at his son with a small smile on his face, and in that moment a brief moment flashed before his eyes. He saw his son standing in a small stage, kind of like the Saiyan tournaments he'd taken part in, and across from the young man who was most assuredly his son was a woman. She was well kempt and dressed like a princess. Bardock internally smiled at that, his son would become royalty at some point. The flash was gone as fast as it had come, and he spoke to both Jine and Kakarot. Kakarot, you will be the one to live free. All I want is for you to live your life the way you want to. You are free from Frisia's rule. Stay safe, my son. Bardock said softly. If our planet isn't destroyed after you leave, we will come back for you, Kakarot. Please don't forget about us. Jine said, tears falling from her eyes. Bardock and Jine planted their hands on the window of the pod as it slowly turned on. Kakarot planted his own hand on the window from the inside as he cried to them. Incapable of speaking normal words at the moment, he watched their expressions as his pod lifted higher. Bardock would then watch as a barrier of ki surrounded the pod and flew high into the atmosphere and leaving the planet. Pulling Jine into his hip, Bardock smiled at Jine. He'll be safe. Bardock quietly spoke. We won't be able to see him ever again. Will we? Jine asked, tears still falling. I won't. But you will. Bardock states as Jine blinked at him. What? She asked, before another pod was softly put on the ground. Before she could even say a single rebuttal, she was tossed inside. Bardock's expression remained silent and composed. He set the coordinates towards planet Earth, a backwater planet far from the eternal reach of Lord Frisia. He watched as Jine's expression changed from confusion, to shock, then to anger, and then finally to eternal sadness. He watched as she banged her hands on the window trying to break it. She screamed out for his name as the pod took off high into the air and left the planet in the same direction that Kakarot had gone. Bardock stood in the clearing all alone and looking towards the sky. And this is where a stray tear fell from his eyes as he watched both pods disappear into the milky black of the eternal universe that was space. Wiping the tears from his face, he turned towards the falling sun in the distance. Frisia's ships were closing in on the planet now, and he could only guess that they were only about a few thousand meters away. He powered up to his maximum, the ground cracking and trees breaking apart from the ki flare he had released, and took off into the sky towards the Frisia force. He had one last job to do. 0W0. Planet Vegeta's atmosphere, final stand. As Bardock flew through the atmosphere, he could feel the sounds of the planet disappearing. Being replaced by the ever-present silence that space provided, he flew through the quiet sky before he noticed hundreds if not thousands of soldiers leaving their ships. He increased the speed of which he was flying towards them as he powered up to his maximum output of power and pierced through the clouds. His ki flared around him as he felt the eyes of thousands of Frisia soldiers lock onto his position, flying swiftly towards Frisia's main mothership. Without a single command, those thousands of soldiers flew towards him, blocking his way towards Frisia's ship. He let out a call of fury before screaming out Frisia's name as he landed a singular punch to one of the closest soldiers to him. The punch immediately killed them on impact, their head twisted around and facing behind them. He then switched over to another soldier who had pointed their palm at him in preparation to use a ki blast. He pulled his hand back and blasted them into ashes before twisting around to dodge another ki blast aimed at his back that he retaliated with a kick to their skull. He leapt through each and every fighter that Frisia had sent in order to keep him held back. Each and every single soldier he killed was another death on his conscience as he glared at the mothership that was slowly coming into view for him. Bodies laid across the void of space as he made his way to where he could visibly see Frisia on his mothership before he finally managed to reach the deepest portion of the gathered party of the Frisia force. He watched as the sealing hatch of the mothership that held Frisia open up and Frisia slowly came out within his hovercar. Bardock said nothing as he watched the vehicle slowly float into the air high above him. Even in his final moments, Frisia was still trying to portray himself as the one who was above him and the Saiyan race. Bardock growled to himself as he pulled one arm back to gather as much energy as he could into the palm. He watched as Frisia had slowly rose a single finger into the air, a small orb of red glowing from it. As he glares at Frisia, who is clearly not taking him seriously despite the serious expression on his face, Bardock screams out towards the frost demon, not as though the demon would even hear him. This is the end. Bardock screamed as he threw his most powerful beam of energy at Frisia. During his little demand, Frisia's little ball of energy had quickly gained size and became a massive supernova. The ball of energy had been sent towards him in mere seconds as he spoke those words, and he released his strongest blast. The beam hit the supernova with the power of 1,000 small planets exploding, and for a few mere moments Bardock believed he was truly holding it back. But as soon as he felt the weight of the energy weighing down on his beam, his arms felt as though they were going to break from the sheer weight of it. His arms suddenly spurted out blood from his biceps, triceps and wrists. Blood fell from his head as he struggled to focus on the beam in front of him, and as the ball of energy slowly encompassed his beam, it was pushed all the way to his palms. He held his palms there for what felt like years, his body being pushed back towards the atmosphere of planet Vegeta as he struggled to keep it floating high in the air. He grunted and growled as he watched the ground of planet Vegeta slowly come into view as he realized that he wouldn't be capable of holding back the ball of energy. He was just about to press his hand into the supernova and detonate it when a vision hit him again. This time he was not on planet Vegeta. The place appeared small and compact, but it was warm and safe. He tried to shake off the vision but failed when he was given a figure of a young girl who stood no higher than his stomach. Tears were falling from her eyes as she spoke in muffled tones. But there was one thing he did know: she was pleading for him to stay alive and not to die. When the vision subsided, Bardock realized that both his hands were already inside the ball of energy. Struggling to pull them out, he pushed as much power into his limbs in order to try and stave off the ever-present feeling of failure. But that was when the supernova had pulled his entire body and he was pushed into its core. Just as this happened, the supernova had slammed into the crust of planet Vegeta. It pressed down into the planet as it burrowed deep into the planet's deeper portions and eventually reaching its core, causing a destruction-level event that would kill everyone and everything. Graawala! Bardock screamed as the sensation of being burnt alive hit him from every single spot on his body. His armor flickered and tore apart, the heat of the energy and destruction of the planet destroying the armor. First it was the shoulder pauldrons, then it was the hip pauldrons, followed by his upper torso's armor being destroyed completely. His eyes were slowly becoming white when the air behind him, just as the planet's core detonated its destruction sequence, a black and purple portal with crackling electricity sparked behind him. The air exploded with a force unseen by the planet's destruction and Frisia's laughing gaze, and the portal SED Bardock within. As Bardock's body disappeared from his universe, the explosion of planet Vegeta continued on. Frisia's laughter filling the void of space, although nobody could even hear what was causing the Frost Demon to laugh. The other warriors within Frisia's closest surviving army watched as the planet and their inhabitants slowly decreased in their high hundreds of thousands of inhabitants lowered over time until reaching zero on their scouters. By the time Frisia and his army noticed the disappearance of all the power levels on the planet, they left in order to return to the main Frisia planet that Frisia worked on. Bardock POV, slowly falling through portal into an universe. Time had slowly disappeared when Bardock flew through the portal. He wasn't aware that he was no longer in his dimension or universe. He wasn't even aware of how much time was passing by. His eyes blinked as he stared at the vast expanse of what he personally believed to be space. The Saiyan man had always prided himself on knowing what the sky looked like. So imagine his surprise when he noticed how the stars looked vastly different from when he'd sent his son out to space with his mate following not too far behind them. Then he noticed a bright light at the end of the strange void. He reached a hand out to it to figure out what was going on. And that was when he heard it, the sound of water splashing against solid ground. He had been in the void of space where silence encompassed all. So why was he hearing a sound from water splashing on what he could only assume was a beach? His answer came when he fell through the portal, appearing high above a beach and falling towards the ground at high speeds. It was nearing evening for the place he was landing. Seeing multiple buildings off in the distance turning on their lights, Bardock suddenly felt a strange wave of sickness as he fell. By the time he neared the ground, he braced himself to be turned into a crater like usual when he smashed into what felt like sand. A massive explosion of force came from his landing as he'd fallen on his back, and staring high into the sky he could see a moon, a crescent to be exact, floating into the sky. The sound all around him was muffled as blood fell into his vision. Steam wafted off his tense and dying body as he coughed up a large amount of blood from his mouth onto the sand to his right. He heard the frantic pitter-patter of feet slapping wet sand coming in his direction, but it was all muffled just as the voice he'd heard following the sounds of feet slapping against water and sand. A figure appeared in his vision and all he could hear was their frantic whispers and pleas. "Please don't die. Stay awake, sir. Shoot." A feminine voice called out. "Sir, wait." Muzutafu, Japan, heading towards Aldera High School, 2264. They say to wish upon a falling star, but no one tells you what to do when that star hits the earth with enough force to shatter your world. My hopes were already broken. I didn't think there was anything left to lose until the sky opened up and gave me a reason to run. 200 years ago, many things about the world had changed. Wars had happened, countries had joined together in order to try and stop global conflict, and many more. But there was one thing that caused the world to become united against. That was when strange abilities came about. People with the uncanny ability to use telepathic thoughts to move objects, spit fire out of their mouths, or even fire ice at people gained a lot of attention. Due to that, the world was slow at first to change in order to anticipate what would happen next. But because of how many people were popping up with these strange abilities, it wasn't until the Third World War that it was given a name. Quirks. These abilities allowed one to use powers that were only thought to be fantasy. Those who could wield telekinesis were touted as powerful individuals, same for those who could lift hundreds of tons, even those who could run at the speed of sound. That last one may have been a bit of a stretch, but it still could happen. But there was something else that changed with the entire world when it came to the dawn of quirks. There were still people who used those abilities that could have been used for good against those who were innocent. Due to this, a new profession was created to counter this uprising of crime. Heroes were given a license to use their quirks in order to stop crime all over the world. It started in the United States, then it filtered all across the world slowly before it was a renowned profession that you could get paid for. This isn't the story of how I became a hero. It is how I became a hero itself, but it's the story of how I met someone who saved me when I was at my lowest point. This is the story of how a falling star brought me to realize that quirks aren't as powerful as I thought. Mizufu train station, 7:30 a.m. The sound of shoes clapping against pavement could be heard. It was followed by the happy breathing of a girl. As the view reveals a head of curly forest green hair, followed by a set of wide emerald green eyes with freckles on her cheeks in the shape of diamonds, we see where she's heading. The train station is only a few meters away from her when the sounds of civilians are clamoring around the station, not really in a panic but awe at what is happening. This young girl who is seen running towards the crowd with a happy smile on her face is Midoriya Izuku, and she watches as someone leaps into view from behind a building. The man was brown in color and wooden in appearance. He had a mask covering the lower part of his face as his serious expression glared at the opponent he was going against, a giant villain who had sharp teeth and a fearful expression. In his hand was a small purse that he'd stolen from a random old lady as he screeched for the hero to go away. Izuku watched on with wide, excited eyes as the hero in question leapt around using his arm as a tether in order to swing around the thrown arms in his direction. Theft, evading police, and causing destruction to public property. You are the vilest of scum, the hero called out. Izuku's eyes gained a very bright glint in them as she watched him extend his arms. Her notebook was already out, and she was furiously writing down his position in the air with his arms spread out and about to stretch out for the use of one of his super moves. She even called it out to the crowd. He's going to use his super move. Izuku called out. Lacquered chain pre-dash. Both Izuku and the hero in question were about to call out before another voice was heard. Cannon Canyon. A feminine voice called out loudly. It was followed by the largest shadow Izuku had ever seen before. Looking to the sky, she found a large woman with a hero suit flying through the air, having jumped earlier after gaining enough speed to launch herself at the villain. The woman was very tall, with long pale blonde hair that extended down her back with violet eyes as her suit was a mixture of beige and purple. The woman's foot slammed into the villain's face, knocking out a tooth, as the man fell back into the station that everyone was standing outside of. Another hero came into view as he moved in front of the crowd to block any and all debris flying towards them. Stay back, everyone, the hero called out, his large gauntlets hanging from his wrists. As soon as it was safe to view the platform, the woman shrunk herself down with a stuck flare. When she turned around, she found cameras on her as she posed for them, showing off her rear with a wink to the cameras. My name is Emilady, and it's nice to make your acquaintance, the lady said, showing her butt off to the reporters. Money shot. Money shot. Money shot. The reporters called out, taking multiple pictures. Izuku stood off to the side with a notable frown on her face as she shook her head in disappointment. MT Lady, whilst doing her best to protect the civilians, had gotten in the way of Kamui Wood's super move and would have been hurt had he not stopped himself before launching the attack. What the young heroine had done was downright evil and very cutthroat, taking the spotlight away from Kamui Woods as the man just grumbled to himself. Izuku felt really bad about him. He'd been dipping a bit in the polls due to the random appearances of new heroines or heroes in his area. She finished writing what she got on the new heroine and Kamui Woods before turning to leave. She was stopped by a man with a mutation quirk where a star appeared on top of his head, having heard her muttering about her thoughts on the new heroine and Kamui Woods. "Hey, I saw and heard you taking notes. Are you wanting to become a hero?" the civilian asked curiously. "Oh, of course," Izuku said with a happy smile. "Well, keep taking those notes. I'm sure you'll make a great hero with them," the civilian happily replied before walking away. "Yes," Izuku replied before walking away herself. It wouldn't be until around 7:45 that she'd finally arrive at school. And the happy attitude she showed earlier was soon replaced by a very tired and disappointed attitude as she walked through the halls. For all the happiness she showed towards heroes and quirks, this was the one place where she knew for a fact that her thoughts and analyses were always mocked and destroyed. Aldera Junior High. Although they'd rebranded in the last year to Aldera High School, they were still the only school in the area that would allow her within their hallowed halls. Why would she immediately lose her happy attitude, you might ask? Well, that's very simple. Ever since the world began to get more heroes working for the government, the number of those without powers began to drop. And over time it reached a point where only 20% of all humanity were diagnosed quirkless, and that remained for those who were either elderly or were given the horrifying diagnosis. And unfortunately for her, Izuku was a part of that miserable 20% of people who were born quirkless. Someone who couldn't even use a quirk. She entered the classroom and moved to her seat. She was very surprised to find she was one of the last students there. There were multiple people who shot small paper wads at her as she moved through the class, and she sat down in her seat just a few desks away from an ash-blonde boy who looked completely irritated. As the teacher for the class entered the room, they held a smug expression on their face as they walked towards the front desk. He was a slightly older gentleman, but that was a mere facade. For he was one of the very people who made Izuku's life a living hell in this school, what with him constantly marking her grades lower and his eyes wandering her frame from time to time. It sickened her whenever someone looked in her direction. They only saw her body instead of the mind behind it. Nobody liked when the quirkless reject was getting a better grade than them, and Izuku had done these assignments many times over. Her answers were never wrong, but they were marked that way. The teacher watched the students closely as he moved to the front of the classroom. "All right, class, I know you hate doing this, but it's mandatory. You all are supposed to choose what kind of university you wish to go to when you graduate," the teacher said, before he paused for a moment, his eyes roaming the class. But who cares? You all want to be heroes, right?" the teacher called out, tossing the papers into the air. The eruption of happiness from the students was a massive roar that nearly hurt Izuku's ears. She had to place her hands over her ears in order to protect them from the loud sounds of the class before a loud, sparkling explosion erupted within the class. "None of you extras are gonna be a hero. Only I will be able to," the ash-blonde boy called out. At the sound of the sparks coming from the boy's hands, Izuku's body trembled further. She hated the sound of those little explosions. They were always used against her in some kind of way to make sure she submitted. It wasn't that she was afraid of them, no, she was more afraid of the person who controlled those explosions, since the attitude he held was vastly worse than the quirk he used. Bakugo, you appear to have written on this university sheet that you wish to enter UA? The teacher questioned, watching the class's reactions. "What? Really? That's insane. It's better than what you little rejects will be capable of. I'll become the #1 hero, and I'll become the richest hero out there," Bakugo called out, proudly huffing into the air. "HM? It appears that Midoriya wishes to enter UA as well," the teacher said, his expression turning bored but smug. The silence that followed was as though Izuku was placed in space. Her entire body shrunk in on itself as she did her best to shrink into the ground and hide herself from everyone. But she hated how even under all these baggy clothes it couldn't even work, especially when the sound of an explosion pulled her from her fearful thoughts as a palm struck her desk. DKU. What makes you think that you can become a hero? Thinking you are superior to me, huh? Bakugo screeched in her face. No, I wouldn't ever think that. It's just my dream to become a H-hero. Izuku replied with fear in her eyes and tone. What makes you think that you're quirkless but getting in will do? You don't even have a quirk, much less anything useful. Bakugo yelled angrily, hands crackling with his quirk. Yeah. What's she gonna do? Stuck the teachers. Another student called out. It'll probably be the best way she could get in. Another snickered. Izuku covered her body after that next comment. Then another explosion rocked her out of her desk. A large burn marking itself on her desk as Bakugo slowly stalked over towards her, and from Izuku's perspective, Bakugo and the rest of the class, including the teacher, had crimson demonic eyes. Her entire body trembled as Bakugo planted a palm over her position as he prepared to use an explosion on her personally. That was when the teacher decided to call out to them both, making sure that Izuku could hear the annoyance in his tone when he specifically called out to Bakugo and Izuku. Bakugo, please sit back down, we have class to get to. Midoriya, stop antagonizing Bakugo, you know how he gets when someone challenges him. The teacher drawled out as he smirked at her flushed face and embarrassed expression. For the rest of the day the class continued to annoy her with their antics of blowing small wads of wet paper into her hair. She stayed quiet as she silently worked on her homework that the class was given for the day, and she was working on her notebook after that. When the end of the school day came, she was seen still doodling inside her notebook about the heroes she'd seen on her way to school that morning. She muttered about how MT Lady would be far more useful towards being placed in a rural location rather than an urban location for her actions. As she stared down at the picture of MT Lady in her notebook, she closed it up and prepared to put it away when it was taken from her desk. Looking up, she found Bakugo holding the notebook above him as she immediately stood up and reached for it. His height being child's play at keeping it out of reach as she jumped up like a little girl reaching for a cookie that their older brother was holding above them. We're not done, Deku. Bakugo said, his expression neutral. Did you give it back, Kaken? Izuku called out, reaching for the notebook as he raised it higher. He tossed it over to his cronies who read the title. And they began to laugh hysterically before crinkling the notebook as much as they could and mocking her. Hero analysis for my future? What are you three? The duo questioned. I said give it back. Izuku called out, her voice raising an octave. Deku, what did I say about talking to your superiors? Bakugo questioned as he walked towards her. Why you? Izuku growled nervously. What have I told you about those stupid stalker notes? They're not gonna help you at any point in your life, just why won't you give up? Bakugo called out, before grabbing her notebook and detonating an explosion between his hands. The notebook was between his hands when the nitroglycerin sweat ignited the small book. Bakugo heard Izuku let out a small scream of agony as she watched the young man then toss the notebook outside the window as she rushed towards the window. Before she could even get to the window to watch it fall, a hand grabbed her shoulder and pulled her back before she found a leg slamming into her gut. Had she eaten lunch that day, it would be released all over the floor right now as she felt a long finger slice through her baggy uniform. Underneath the uniform was a slight sight of the color in her bra. As soon as that was seen, Bakugo lifted Izuku from the ground as he shoved her against the wall, her head smacking against it as she grabbed his wrist. Her eyes stared into his ruby red as he glared down at her with all the hatred that she had ever seen from him. Her eyes slowly watered as she watched him wrench her hand from his wrist. Stop making those stupid notes, Deku, they're not gonna get you anywhere. Also, don't apply for UA nerd. Bakugo said, before igniting his quirk on her shoulder. The smell of burnt caramel and nitroglycerin wafted from her uniform's shoulder. It felt as though it were melting into her skin, but she kept her voice quiet as she glared into the eyes of Bakugo as his other hand was placed over her mouth. Her breath hitched as she watched it turn a bright orange, the heat of it causing her eyes to shrink to pinpricks as the young man spoke again. If I find out that you're still trying out for UA, I will find you. And make sure that you wish you hadn't. Bakugo said, pulling his hands away from her. As Izuku slowly slid to the ground within the classroom, she felt tears stinging at the edges of her eyes. It always happened like this. Bakugo would bully her and destroy her property. She could sue him for the amount of notebooks she's had to replace, but it wouldn't go anywhere. Nobody would protect someone who is quirkless nowadays, so she decided to keep quiet about this and stand back upright. Bakugo chose that moment to speak again, and Izuku would wish from that day forward that she'd never heard him speak again. You know, there might be a way for you to become a hero. Bakugo said, a smug expression on his face. Izuku's eyes flittered over to him, hope struggling to surface from within. How about you pray you get a quirk in the next life and jump off the roof? Maybe then you might be able to become a hero. Bakugo called out, laughing. The moment those words left his mouth, Izuku glared hatefully at him. For the first time she actually felt as though she should hit him for saying something like that. She'd known him for over a decade, and this was something he never stooped to. As soon as he saw her face, though, he raised his palm and showed off his quirk in small sparks, causing her to lower her face in utter fear. Fear of what would happen if she continued to get in his way for now. So as she looked away with an arm covering her open blouse, Bakugo and his cronies left the area. It wouldn't be until after she left the school building that she'd find her notebook. Seeing as how it was sitting in the koi pond within the school's courtyard, other students were milling about the place as though they were waiting on their parents to pick them up. And as Izuku lifted her notebook out of the water, she could only stare down at the booklet itself in disappointment and sadness at this entire situation. Bakugo had never acted like that before, so that begged the question. Why did he start acting like her being dead would be better for him now? Those vile words moved through her head again. And again she hated those words. Underpass to rooftop, around early evening. Izuku was walking near an underpass as she angrily muttered to herself. Stupid Kaken, what would happen if I actually went through with it? Izuku mumbled to herself. A stray tear fell from her eyes as she thought more about his words. They were so cruel, and to be followed by a small beating was basically them telling her that she was off the hook this time. But next time they find out, the beating would be far worse than it would be this time. She let out a small sigh before walking through the underpass. Her mother had asked her through a text message to collect some food from the grocery store, and Izuku didn't want to disappoint her mother. She pulled out the grocery list that her mother sent her through a text and nodded to herself. The rattling of a manhole behind her went unheard as she continued to walk through the underpass. By the time she reached the other side of the underpass, she heard the sound of the manhole behind her be punched off. Turning around so fast that she thought she'd get whiplash, she noticed an acrid smell enter her nostrils, forcing her to cough and cover her nose. What stood behind her was a large villain made purely of sludge, and she didn't know whether or not to feel as though today was chock full of bad luck or if today was just going to be a very bad day. I need to get away from him. I didn't know that he would be here, the villain said before looking around. His eyes settled on Izuku's as she froze in place from the building fear growing in her stomach. The sludge villain then noticed how she was frozen in place as he smirked in her direction and spoke in a very dark tone. Ah, I see a cute medium-sized meat suit. I'll take over from here. The villain called out, wrapping around her. As the sludge covered her body from head to toe, Izuku could only hold her breath. Her arms and legs flailed about as she suddenly felt tendrils move about them, causing her to freeze in place and her face to become flushed. But this flush was due to her body being touched entirely on the skin, and it was getting closer to the inner portions of her clothing, specifically under her bra and underwear. With this knowledge that he was going to do something else as well, she struggled that much harder in order to escape his grip. Stop struggling, you little sheet. I need to hide in you so that he doesn't find me. Kind of SCKS that I'm gonna kill a hottie like you. I mean, I like big buttes myself, but you're a little too young to be my type, the sludge villain huskily whispered into her ear. As Izuku continued to struggle, the villain wrapped his tendrils around her BRTS and squeezed them softly. Izuku, as soon as she felt that sensation, let out a closed-mouth scream before struggling even further as the villain moved about the road in place as he struggled with her. He rubbed her Bardock more, causing her to let out an involuntary allowing him to shovel a tendril down her throat, causing her to choke on the tendril itself. Izuku felt as though her mind was going blank. This villain was molesting her at the same time of trying to enter her body to escape someone. And as the vision at the edges of her eyes began to turn black, she could hear the sound of the villain speaking to her again. If you hadn't moved about so much, you would have died in 45 seconds. But it's taken longer than 3 minutes for me to get a grip on you. No matter, as long as I can hide within you, I can finally hide. The villain growled. Just as he was about to squeeze her Bardock further, the manhole behind both the villain and Izuku was blasted out. A long arm stretched through the hole before a man with blonde hair spiked up in 2 tufts appeared from the manhole itself. A smile on his face as he glared at the villain holding Izuku in his grip before he called out to the villain. "Not if I have anything to say about it." The voice called out. "Texawas." "What? All Might?" "No, no, no." The Sludge villain cried out. "Smash." All Might called out, punching the air. The air pressure from the attack was so powerful that the villain was splattered across the road and underpass. Izuku fell out of the sludge and onto the ground unconscious, her eyes closing just as she saw the figure who saved her moments ago. Only one thing on her mind before passing out. "All Might," she whispered before passing out. 5 minutes later, Izuku woke up with a fright as she felt a light tapping on her cheek. It was followed by the sound of the man who saved her yelling at her to wake up before she felt as though she was sick and moved over to some nearby grass. As she threw up the remaining sludge that tried to hide within her body, of which the individual who was helping her cleaned up, she glanced back over her shoulder to see a mountain of a man. He stood at 7 feet 3 inches and was a mountain of muscle. The ever-present smile on his face caused Izuku to immediately scramble to gather her belongings. "Oh, it's my gosh. Why, you're All Might. I have to get your autograph." Izuku mumbled at speeds rivaling the man in front of her. She reached for her notebook, which was conveniently laid on the ground next to her. Opening to a free page, she immediately found the impossible. The man's autograph was already spread out on 2 full pages in his actual handwriting. Happy tears fell from her eyes as she stood up so fast the man thought she had a speed quirk. "Thank you, All Might, sir. I'll treat this as a family heirloom," Izuku called out, constantly bowing to the man. "Not to worry, young lady. But I would like to ask if you're all right. This guy didn't do anything untoward to you, did he?" All Might questioned with a laugh. Izuku was brought back to the moment that the sludge villain had squeezed her chest. And as soon as the memory of it came back to her, she immediately covered her chest and nodded her head. The look on the man's face narrowed and turned grim. "What did this man do to you?" All Might questioned softly. He touched. "In order to get me to open my mouth." Izuku softly whispered and shivered. "I see, so not only will he be going to prison for robbery, but for molesting a minor," All Might said, glaring at the soda bottle he was holding. As soon as those words were stated, the eyes in the soda bottle just gave a roll as though they were shrugging. The hero gave a shake of his head before crouching a bit away from Izuku as the young girl then remembered something she needed to say to this man. He was her savior and her hero. Maybe he could answer a question she's been wondering for the last few minutes ever since she left school. "All Might, can I ask you a question?" Izuku asked, looking at her hero. "Sorry, young lady, I have to get this villain to the police," All Might said, tilting his head at her. "Please, it's just one question," Izuku called out, reaching a hand to the man's pant leg. Before she could even react, the man had leapt into the air, bringing the young woman high into the air above Mizudafu. The young lady screamed her daylights off as the wind lapped at her hair and face, causing her to hold onto the man's leg as tight as possible to prevent herself from falling. All Might turned his head after noticing how he wasn't flying as fast as he normally did through the air after one of his high jumps. Turning his head to look behind him, he found Izuku holding onto his leg before pulling the leg towards himself and looking at her. "What are you doing?" "I appreciate my fans, but this is a bit excessive," All Might said, trying to shove her off him. Sorry, sir. I just have to ask you a Q question." Izuku called out through the wind, her mouth and eyes being whipped around due to the wind pressure. Keep your mouth and eyes shut, I'll find a spot to land, All Might said, before leaning towards a nearby building. When they landed on a nearby building, Izuku let out heavy breaths. Her eyes were swirls as she trembled from the amount of time spent in the air flying under All Might's torso. That was very dangerous, young lady. You could have gotten yourself hurt. All Might scolded, lightly chopping her head. I'm sorry, sir. I just had to ask you a question. It'll be the only one I'll ask. Izuku called out, her body trembling. I need to leave, I have to get the villain to the police. All Might said, turning to leap away. Just as he was about to leap, Izuku had clenched her hands before screaming out to her hero. The man was crouching to the ground when he heard her voice. Can someone quirkless, like Emmett, ever become a hero like you? Izuku asked, her tone soft but loud. All Might froze in place as he thought about how to answer that question. His mind was stuck on the singular word she'd stated earlier though, quirkless. He'd been quirkless at one point in his life. And it definitely SCKD for him at the time. Turning his head, he watched as the young girl spoke about how her life at school was filled with students and teachers who never believed in her dream. She spoke about being inspired to become a hero like him, one who smiles in order to make everyone feel safe. While he was stuck in the memory of the first time he ever saved a life, he never noticed the steam falling off his shoulders. It wasn't until his hip gave a large strain of pain that he suddenly planted a palm on the bar behind him to stabilize himself. His muscular form slowly shrunk down until what remained was a husk of what he originally looked like. His face was angular, and his eyes were a deep black with blue iris. His clothes looked completely oversized on him as he stood before Izuku before the young lady looked up at him before going to ask him the question again. The look on her face when she stared at the man was priceless. Wide eyes and a nervous expression changed to a very fearful one as she let out a scream of fear and pulled out her phone to call the police. Ironic since the man in front of her worked with the police. What did you do to All Might? Where did he go? Why, you're an imposter. Izuku drabbled out in fear as her body trembled. I can confirm that I am All Might, the gaunt man said, coughing up blood. Izuku rushed over at the man, pulling out a small handkerchief and dabbling his cheek. All Might was so confused by this action, he let it continue until Izuku was finished and pulled away from him before blushing in embarrassment. Chow. This doesn't make any sense. Izuku asked, looking at All Might. You know those guys who flex in order to look cool at the pool? All Might asked as Izuku nodded. Well, I'm kind of like that. How did that happen? That can't be true. Izuku asked in defiance. I was in a villain fight about 7 years ago. Because of what happened in that fight, I can no longer fight as though I were in my prime. I went from being able to be around at all times of the day to only being able to be a hero for 3 hours a day. All Might said, revealing his injured hip. What Izuku saw when the man lifted his shirt was a large crater inside the left side of his torso. Spiderweb cracks moved out across the man's torso, even reaching just under his neck, and were a rainbow in their color. It was so sick that she nearly threw up on the spot from how green her face had gone from the appearance of her hero in such a state. Disgusting, isn't it? Because of this injury, I haven't been able to act as a hero very much. I lost 70% of my respiratory system, one of my kidneys, and about 80% of my stomach. All Might said, with a sigh, sitting down against the bar. 7 years ago. That was your fight with Toxic Chainsaw, right? Izuku asked, concerned. You know your stuff, but no. That guy was not strong enough to even take me off guard. The hit he landed on my body was a fluke. All Might chuckled. But if whoever did that to you was still around, what does that mean? Izuku asked as All Might looked into her eyes. I made sure he didn't come back from that. And it's something you shouldn't look into. I made sure that it was hidden from the public. If they found out that their #1 hero was as injured as I am. All Might said as Izuku finished his sentence. There would be pandemonium. Possible even a 4th World War. Izuku mumbled as All Might nodded. I'm not sure about the 4th World War, but yes. Pandemonium. Now, you asked me a question earlier. About if you could become a hero without a quirk. All Might questioned. Izuku nodded her head as All Might nodded his head. As much as he wanted to give her the power of taking on her dreams, he couldn't force himself to give her the power to act on them. Shaking his head, he rubbed his hair with his bony hand. Before speaking in a soft but neutral tone. At this point in time, I am not sure a quirkless hero is even possible. You can get close. There are heroes whose quirks are like Eraserhead. But he uses a quirk to level the playing field. So a quirkless hero is not something that I can see as physically possible. All Might said, as Izuku's eyes began to tear up. Izuku fell to her knees at that. She knew that this was coming. It was only her buying time until she heard it from him, and as her hopes were breaking apart, she wiped the tears from her eyes as she felt a gaunt hand softly be placed on her left shoulder. The one where she had a burn scar from earlier that day, and because it was on her burn she flinched at the cold feeling. She quietly hoped that All Might didn't notice her flinch. Thankfully it seemed as though he was focusing more on their surroundings. He then spoke in a soft tone that she hoped wasn't going to continue breaking her heart. It's all right to dream, young lady, just please make sure that it's realistic. All Might said before opening the door to the roof and walking down the steps. Izuku remained on the rooftop as she stared off into the distance. All Might, the man who prided himself on stating that anyone could become a hero, stated that she couldn't become a hero without a quirk. Tears fell down her face in a massive swarm as she sobbed to herself. Pulling her legs into her chest, she cried for the next hour until it was nearing late evening. When she realized the time, she immediately rushed away from the rooftop and made to walk back home, but not before sending a text to her mother apologizing for not arriving at home in time with groceries. Her mother, bless that woman's heart, had replied with a text that they could go the next day together. And Izuku left her mother a final text stating that she'd be at Dagobah Beach for a while too. Her mother just texted back telling her to be back before it's too late for her to get enough sleep for school on Monday. Dagobah Municipal Beach Park, late evening. Izuku stared off into the distance on the beach. She had no clue what was happening today. First, she saw two heroes, then she was told she could become a hero with her notes by a civilian. After that she was told to kill herself before finally meeting her hero. There's a saying where one shouldn't ever meet their heroes, and Izuku now knew what that saying really meant because you never know how your hero is going to act when you meet them. Tears fell down her face as she sat down on a large fridge looking over a large pile of trash. Over the course of the last 20 years, this beach had become a trash pile that had grown for years. The people illegally dumped their trash here because nobody ever cleaned it up, and she couldn't help but feel as though she helped with that sometimes whenever she came here. Mainly because now that she was told to essentially give up on her dreams, she felt as though she fit in well with the trash. At least it never talked back to her. As if to spite her for her thought, a stray empty soda can smacks her in the head. Looking up at the pile, Izuku sighed to herself and stared at the ocean softly wafting up the beach and bringing in new trash from the waters itself. A small sad smile appeared on her face as she thought about Bakugo's words again, how he wanted her to die so that she wouldn't be in his way anymore. Her hands clenched at her hips as she growled angrily to herself. It was mostly at herself for not being able to defend herself. But she'd never really been able to defend herself properly. Nobody wanted to teach a quirkless person how to fight. It would put her out of the place society had set up for her. Sighing to herself, she pulled out her notebook and stared at the waterlogged pages. Why can't I just be able to achieve something for once? Izuku mumbled to herself. A shooting star flashed across the sky for a moment, and seeing it, Izuku sighed fondly. I wish I could have some kind of quirk. I don't care what kind of quirk it is. Just something to be accepted by everyone. Izuku whispered, tears falling from her eyes and softly splashing on the sand below. Crash crunch. The sound of an explosion to her left caused the entire trash piles to tumble over one another. Izuku had managed to get away from her position in time to rush over towards where the crash had happened. Her bare feet slapped against the wet sand as she rushed over to the smoke rising into the sky, and she couldn't bear to see whatever kind of attack she might get into this time. Just as she reached the edge of a large crater, she was greatly surprised and shocked to find it was at least 20 meters deep into the ground. Sliding into the crater, she made it to the individual deep inside. He was wearing what she could only guess were a dark pair of reinforced underwear. And the rest of his body was revealed to the world, and Izuku couldn't help the scream of fear that flew out of her mouth as she stared at the man. Kneeling down next to him, she pulled out her backpack and grabbed some medical supplies and covered his arms and legs with gauze and hydrogen peroxide. The man groaned slightly from the feeling of the wet substance on his body, before Izuku whispered to him in a tone that prayed he'd not die. "Please don't die. Stay awake, sir." "Shoot." Izuku called out. "Sir, wait." Just as she was about to say more, a hand immediately reached up and grabbed her throat. And her emerald eyes stared down fearfully into cobalt black as she heard the man growl in front of her face. Fear was evident in her expression as the man continued to growl in her face. That was when he spoke. It was raspy and filled with a low, gravely tone, but it was enough to make her nearly pieces herself. You. The man questioned, as a brown tail sprouted out behind him. Dagoba Municipal Beach Park, Midoriya Apartment, Mizudafu, Japan, 2264. The air on this planet tasted too clean. No smoke, no ozone, no smell of burning cities. It felt wrong, a peaceful world that didn't know the monsters hiding in the dark. And looking at the girl trembling in my grip, I realized I had fallen into a nest of the weakest creatures I had ever seen. You. The man questioned, his tail rising behind him. Izuku had no clue what was happening. One moment the man before her was laying unconscious on the ground, the next he's grabbing her by the throat, which just so happened to be cutting off her oxygen supply, and as she struggled to breathe the man gripped her harder and stood upright. As much as Izuku wanted to stare at the heavily built body the man before her had, she was more focused on not passing out from the lack of oxygen. As she gasped for air, her hands moved up to try and claw at the offending hand that was closing her airway, her eyes wide and fearful as the man glared into her emerald eyes. The man then realized that he wouldn't get an answer from her like this before letting go. His eyes were wild, but from what Izuku could see, he was not liking the situation he was currently being a part of. His eyes glanced around the place, as though searching for something that wasn't even here. And as she coughed in order to get her breath back, he stood before her, blood still falling from his body and an angered expression on his face. He stomped over to her until she was crawling backwards in an effort to get as far away from this man as possible, and as he stomped over to her, her breathing increased. Please don't hurt me," Izuku cried out, holding her arms above her head. The brute of a man in front of her paused when he loomed over her body. He stared down at her with his crazed and wild eyes before they slowly began to soften, and he truly took in his surroundings. The smell of the ocean hit his nostrils immediately after the man slowly calmed his raging heart down. It was followed by the smell of rusting iron and metal. Turning his gaze back down to the trembling girl in front of himself, he noticed the handprint on her throat as he looked down at his hands before clenching them and kneeling down to be around her height from where she trembled in fear on the ground. Cobalt eyes stared into emerald as he stared at her with all the anger his heart could muster in the moment. You. The man questioned. Midoriya Izuku. Please don't hurt me, yes sir. Why you're still hurt? Izuku trembled in front of him fearfully. Where? I. The man questioned, his tone low but no longer hostile. Mizudafu, Japan. Why you're at Dagoba Municipal Beach Park? Izuku stuttered out as she tried to calm her raging heart. Izuku would watch as the man reached up towards his head as though he were searching for something. As soon as the man found that whatever he was looking for wasn't present, he let out a frustrated grunt before glaring her directly in the eyes, forcing her heart to race again. Izuku was many things, but afraid of every little thing that threatened her life was one of those many things. Even if they took on a human form. What do you mean, Mizudafu, Japan? Where is planet Vegeta? The man questioned. Izuku blinked at him in confusion before she realized that this guy was either one of those anime fans from America or a really good actor. I'm not sure I know of a planet called that. Can you tell me what part of the G galaxy that's in? Izuku asked, trying to figure out what he was talking about. Planet Vegeta, home planet of the Saiyan race. What happened to it? The man yelled. I don't know. All I know is that the planet you're on is planet Earth, Izuku said, fearfully pulling her arms over herself again. The man paused when she said those words. He looked at the sky before noticing the distinct blue and green tint of the sky. Blinking in confusion, he grabbed her shoulders and stood her upright on the sand, her bare feet softly crunching into the sand. His hands forced her face to look directly at his own as she fearfully took in the bloody expression the man had before he gave one last question. "What year is it?" he asked, his voice suddenly very low and sounding. "But what's wrong?" Izuku asked, the inner dream of helping others coming out for a moment. The man suddenly stumbled backwards and fell to his knees. Izuku immediately realized that the man's adrenaline was probably running dry at this point and hefted the man over her shoulder. His arm wrapped around her neck as she held onto it with her right hand grasping the wrist softly before moving down the path she'd made to hide from the world on the beach. The man leaning on her couldn't do anything but just stare into the distance as he willingly allowed her to bring her away from the beach that smelled of salt and rust, and it was replaced with ozone and carbon. His cobalt-black eyes took in the city they were walking through as Izuku eventually reached her apartment. She could smell the katsudon being made in the kitchen as she did her very best in order to rush the man through the apartment. Izuku was working purely on adrenaline because if she didn't help this man, he might die from the injuries he was currently suffering from without medical treatment. Carrying a 200-pound man up 3 flights of stairs was very difficult, especially when the man eventually gave up trying to even move at this point, but she managed to lift him up the stairwell on pure adrenaline. She was a few doors away from her apartment when she heard the man mutter something under his breath. What did you say?" Izuku whispered to him. "Jijin. Kakarot. What happened to them?" The man questioned. "I never heard of a Jine or Kakarot, but when you get better, I'll see if I can help you find them," Izuku promised as the man gave her a side eye. Black and green met one another as he seemed to stare into her soul. Then without even giving a single word retort, he nodded his head as she knocked on her apartment door leading to her home. The smell of pulled pork and eggs drafted through the door, causing the man to tremble and drool slightly, causing Izuku to giggle softly before opening the door. The sounds of Inko cooking in the kitchen was overheard as Izuku moved the man into the living room and softly laid him on the couch in order to rest from the journey to get here. Izuku then moved into the kitchen and spoke to her mother. Although speaking to the woman was a great battle itself. "Izuku, I heard you walk through the door. What took you so, oh my gosh? What happened to you?" Inko asked, as her normal tone swiftly changed to fearful worried. Rushing over to her daughter, Inko pulled her daughter into a hug before checking the handprint over her neck. "Mom, I'm okay. But there's a man on the couch and he's in dire need of help," Izuku said, as Inko nodded and moved after her. "Whoever this man was, he will be sent to the police for attacking you," Inko said with a determined expression. "Mom, he was. He is injured. I don't think he was in his right state of mind when he attacked me," Izuku said, exasperated. "Then tell me what is going on? Why is there a dying man on our couch?" Inko called out, rushing towards the bathroom. Izuku was standing before the dying man on their couch as she looked over the injuries on his form. The burns would go away with time, but the cuts and bruises on his body would either fade or they would be scars with due time after recovery. As Izuku fretted over the man laying on their couch, Inko returned with a first aid kit on hand and worked on helping the man get his wounds taken care of before glancing at Izuku with her eyes. "Where did you even find this man? He looks like an explosion was detonated on his body specifically," Inko questioned, as she placed gauze and bandages over the man. I was at Dagoba Municipal Beach. I go there to think sometimes after a particularly bad day. And I heard a crash near my position at the beach and found him there. Is he going to make it?" Izuku asked, as Inko looked over the man. His expression was filled with barely restrained grunts and growls of pain. It was clear that this man was in clear agony as he tried to recover strength that he was slowly losing over the time that the pain was causing. She let out a few huffs before speaking in a soft but low tone. "He'll survive, mainly because of your early first aid on him. How did you even know how to treat burns? You haven't reached that far in health class in your school yet." Inko questioned as Izuku just looked away with a sad expression. Inko noticed the action and shook her head. Now wasn't the time to talk about that. Right now, she had a patient that needed to be admitted into the hospital and kept inside the place in order to make sure he makes a full recovery. Mom, he asked about a couple people. I think they were his family. Izuku finally said, as Inko blinked at her daughter. What were their names? Inko asked as Izuku spoke. Jine and Kakarot. But I've never heard of those names before. Izuku said, rubbing the back of her head. Search those names up on the internet. I'm sure that it would have those names on there somewhere. Until you tell me why you were able to take care of burns and cuts, I won't want to hear from you about the whole burn thing. Inko said, not trusting her own words. Izuku nodded before leaving the room, her mother being left all alone with the man on the couch. Inko rubbed a wet rag on the man's head as he let out a sigh of relief, the cool feeling of the rag softly brushing his forehead before Inko used her quirk to continue the action. She then tapped the man's cheek in order to try and wake him up. When a singular eye opened up revealing a black-colored iris, Inko spoke in a soft tone. I trust my daughter to believe that you're in pain. So I need you to tell me your name, sir. I can't keep calling you the tall, naked man in my head. Inko said, as the man nodded. Be Bardock. He stated with a slight stutter. Thank you, Bardock. I'll be taking you to a hospital soon. But as of right now, we're going to be taking care of you for a few hours. My daughter is looking for this Jine and Kakarot you spoke of. If nothing comes up, I'm not sure what to even do. Inko stated, before continuing to clean his injuries. Bardock just nodded his head and laid his head back on the pillow under it as his tail wrapped around his waist. Inko noticed this and nearly grabbed it to pull it away from there before a hand softly gripped her wrist, and when she looked at the man, she watched his gaze entirely on the hand. Moving her hand away, she watched the hand gripping her wrist lose the grip before he completely passed out on her couch. Inko didn't know what that was for, but she knew one thing for sure. That tail was not a cosmetic. It was most definitely real. Using her quirk, she pulled her phone over to herself. Calling paramedics, she told them about the man in her home in desperate need of help, and that his name was a Bardock. She's not sure if he's in their system of people. But the paramedics told her that they'd get over there as soon as possible to help her with dealing with the man exactly and that it would take a few minutes to arrive. Izuku soon came out of the bedroom with a pale expression on her face as she pulled out a printed picture of what she could find on any Jine and Kakarot in the history of the planet since the internet. Inko looked at the paper as she hung up the call to the hospital, and she couldn't believe her eyes. There was no record of any Jine or Kakarot living on Earth in the last few hundred years, possibly more. Mother and daughter looked at one another in confusion before glancing back at Bardock. The man wouldn't be happy to know that his assumption, wife and son were not within the Earth's history of people who've lived on the planet itself. Specifically, during the time of the internet. 0W0. Muzutafu General Hospital, 15 minutes after arriving. The train ride to the Muzutafu General Hospital was filled with trepidation. The paramedics had already long since arrived at their apartment and brought Bardock towards the hospital in order to fully help the man with his injuries. When Izuku and her mother arrived at the hospital themselves, they were seeing a sight that was pretty normal for a place that Inko worked at 90% of her day before coming home. Doctors, nurses and interns were rushing about the place and looking for their next patient. Although a major portion of them were gathered around room, the sounds from within the room itself were crashing sounds of metal and bodies smacking against the wall. Izuku and Inko rushed through the door, long after they had gotten their visitor passes, and found Bardock standing with one of the doctors being held in the air. Bardock's expression was filled with rage and fury as he glared at the doctor who had been holding a small needle that was broken at the point. Izuku blinked at that whilst her mother used her quirk to grab onto Bardock's beating heart, forcing the man to stumble backwards whilst holding his chest. His eyes glared over at her with a growing fury as Inko glared back at him. What in the hell are you doing, Bardock-san? These people are just trying to help you? Inko practically screamed at the man. They were trying to take my blood. I have no idea why they want my blood, but I will not have it be tested on. Bardock growled as he struggled to escape from Inko's grasp. If you move another step, I will tear your heart from its valves. Inko warned as Izuku stared at her mother in shock. What? Bardock questioned as his body froze in place. My quirk allows me to grab onto anything that is below a few kilos. A standard heart, no matter the form of body, is around at least 0.25 kilograms and at the most 0.35 kilograms. I'm sure that you can figure out what will happen if I pull it out of place. Inko threatened as Bardock's sweat dropped. Are you sure you want to pull my heart out of place? Bardock questioned as Inko's hand shook slightly. No. I don't want to kill you, but DMN it. If you continue acting like a scared animal, I will have no choice. Inko warned as Bardock growled to himself before sitting down. With Bardock sitting down, Inko turned her gaze to the doctor who was rubbing his neck. She moved over to the doctor before grabbing the needle and moving it toward Bardock, who had leaned back from the floating item. His expression transformed from worry to confusion as he watched it slowly be pressed down into his arm, and blood filled the small vial on the side of it. Once the blood was pulled, the needle pulled out of his arm before floating back to Inko's outstretched arm, and she gave it to the doctor with an exasperated expression on her face. There you go, doctor. I'm not sure why you are in need of checking his blood, but I'm sure that you won't do any experiments on it, right? Inko asked as the doctor nodded and left the room. With that done, Izuku moved over to Bardock as the man slowly calmed down from the attack he'd initiated. Standing just outside of his range for attack, Izuku looked at the man, who looked calmer than he had been earlier. She had no idea how the man could go from pure rage and fury to calm and collected in just a few minutes, but she was getting serious whiplash from the amount of times it had happened in a single day. Can you tell us what happened? Why are you acting like this, Bardock? Izuku asked, looking at the man in worry. Bardock clenched his fists before glancing at the others in the room. I come from a planet. In space. Specifically in the southern galaxy, planet Vegeta. I was protecting it from an evil tyrant who had wanted to destroy the planet itself. I failed. Inko stood off to the side as she listened to his tale. How he'd sent his mate and son off-world in order to keep them safe from the tyrant and make sure that they wouldn't be found. Stating that he'd sent them to a backwater planet called Earth, and he had spent a lot of time thinking about this planet and how it's named the very same as the planet he'd sent his son and mate. He growled to himself as he glared at the ground. His power of 10,000 failed him when trying to fight off Frisia, and now he was on a planet filled with so many weaklings that could kill him as of this moment. Well, maybe not the girl who was looking at him right now. You're an alien? A nurse asked, confused. I guess you could say that, but I'd call you all aliens to me. Bardock said as he glared at the nurse. Okay, well, the blood results won't come back for a few days. We need to talk about your actions in my place of work, Bardock. Inko said, walking over to the man. What of it, woman? Bardock questioned as Inko grabbed his ear and pulled it down. You have caused destruction to multiple items within this hospital. Items that are most definitely not cheap. Do you have any way to pay them back? Inko questioned angrily. What kind of money system does your race of weaklings use? Bardock questioned as Inko used her quirk on his heart again. Do not call us weaklings. I'm pretty sure that our pro-heroes could do a number to your people. Inko growled as Bardock smirked. I'd like to see them try. Bardock said, as Inko glared into his eyes and slapped him on the cheek. The sudden action caused his face to twist to the right with a downright comical expression on his face. He glared back at Inko, who glared into his eyes from where he sat, her hands still outstretched as she spoke again, but this time her tone still low. If you do not stop acting like some petulant child, I will not chance you staying near my daughter. And I will report you to the government, and last time I checked they have ways to catch aliens like you. Inko threatened, this time her tone serious. Please calm down with the threats. Bardock, please calm down, you're only aggravating everyone. Can we just all calm the heck down? Izuku screamed in the room as each doctor and nurse left, leaving the trio alone. Inko and Bardock stared at Izuku, the young woman glaring at both of them with tear-filled eyes. She opened her mouth to speak again before falling to her knees, her hands flying to her heart as she struggled to calm her raging heart down from the thought of yelling. Her entire body trembled as Bardock noticed something within Izuku that Inko's mother hadn't, as the woman paused in her spot to stare at her in shock and awe. Standing up, he moved over to Izuku and knelt down until he was eye level with her, the young woman looking up at him with teary eyes as Bardock let a small huff leave his mouth. Not good at dealing with this kind of thing. I'm out of my depth with where I am and I don't like asking for help. Bardock said as Izuku nodded. I could see that, she said as Bardock lightly chopped her head. I sense something within you, Bardock said, causing Izuku to look up at him whilst rubbing the top of her head. What? Izuku asked, confused. The way you raised your voice, it was the sound of a warrior. Why are you so scared all the time when you can act like that? Bardock questioned as Izuku looked to her mother. I'm not a fan of arguments, Izuku said, looking away. Izuku, what about that dream you wanted to achieve? Inko asked, suddenly feeling very left out of the conversation. I can't do it, Mom. I met my hero, Izuku said, the tears falling even more. You met All Might? When? Inko asked, looking at her daughter in worry. I was caught in a villain attack. It was a Sludge villain. He touched me very badly and All Might saved me, but I asked him if I could be a hero without a quirk. But he said no, Izuku said as she stared at the ground. The reason I went to Dagobah Beach was because it made me feel as though I were nothing more than trash on the side of the road. So I went to the one place where nobody would attack me or attack my dreams, Izuku said as Bardock growled audibly. If I repay my actions for hurting your daughter in this room, will I be let off the hook? Bardock questioned. Depends on how you plan on repaying myself and the hospital, Inko replied, her tone curt. I'll train your daughter, make a warrior out of her. Can see the strength and power of a Ravadragon within her, Bardock said as Inko blinked. Ravadragon? What in the world is a Ravadragon? Inko questioned. It's a dinosaur that was used as food for my planet. It was a worthy opponent for Saiyan children who wanted to show off their power to their parents, Bardock said, as Inko just stared at him. I mean, we've had dinosaurs of our own in the past. But the closest thing we have to a dinosaur is that pro hero who does movies, Inko said as Izuku spoke up for her mother. His name is Godzilla, Mom, and he is the current number 13 hero of America, Izuku said, pouting. Anyway, Bardock called out, earning everyone's attention within the room. I see the strength of my planet's very Ravadragon within her. If I train her until she becomes strong enough to take care of herself, will that cover the expenses? I don't see why not. You might have to get a job when Izuku gets into UA, Inko said, as Bardock nodded. How long will my recovery take after these injuries are cared for? Bardock questioned. It should take about a few months for those burns, but since you're able to be moving about the place, I'd say about a week for you, Inko replied, using her medical knowledge. All right, then after a week I shall train your daughter to be worthy of being an honorary Saiyan warrior, Bardock said, standing up from the ground. Really? Izuku stuttered out. Whoever broke your dreams of grandeur was stupid. So long as you have the power to defend yourself, then you should reach for your dreams no matter the cost, Bardock said, glaring at her. I found no information about Jain or Kakarot, Izuku said as Bardock paused at the cot in the room. What? He questioned, his eyes wide. There are no Jain or Kakarot on this planet, or in the history of the internet, Inko replied to his question. Then I must be in an alternate dimension, Bardock whispered to himself. Dagobah Municipal Beach Park, Muzudafu, Japan, 2264. All Might told me to be realistic. Kaken told me to quit. But as I looked at the man who had fallen from the stars, he didn't look at my lack of a quirk. He looked at my spirit and told me I was soft. And then he told me to move a refrigerator. 1 week later, after a week of recovering at the Midoriya apartment, Bardock found himself moving towards the trash beach that Izuku mentioned. The young woman was at school at the moment, and Bardock wanted to clear out the place for where the two would train. He knew that after his recovery that he was more powerful than he was when he fought Frieza last, so as he stood in the middle of the trash piles all around himself, he spread his legs out. Once his legs were shoulder-length apart, he pulled his arms down to his hips and began to channel his energy throughout his body. Sparks of white electricity bounced across his arms and face as a white flame aura blasted around himself. Blinking in confusion at this, he glanced over at the piles of scrap and used his energy to telekinetically pull a bunch of mechanical items over to himself. Looking at each and every single piece of machinery, he tore them apart with his pure strength and began to reconstruct an item he had once used in order to gauge the power levels of those around himself. He was reconstructing his original scouter that had been completely eradicated by Frisia's supernova attack on him. Just the thought of Frisia nearly killing him filtered through his mind caused Bardock to growl to himself. His power grew in that moment as he focused on the creation of the object that he, the Saiyan race, and the Frisia force used to gauge their enemies. The pieces of the machinery broke apart and slowly combined into one another to create a small device that could be placed on one's ear and gauge the power levels of those around him. As he furthered his anger and hatred towards Frisia, the sounds of the machine he was making screeched, causing him to open his eyes and look at his creation. His scouter was remade. Grabbing it from the air, he placed it on top of his head, connecting it to his ear. Pressing a small button on the side, he set the parameters in order for him to gauge the power levels to the heroes that Inko had spoken about in the hospital a week ago. His serious expression was shown as he watched the numbers on his scouter only reveal that those on this planet could only reach a power level at a maximum of only that was barely a tenth of his full power. The heroes of this world could only amount to barely a tenth of his full power. Sitting down in the sand, he smashed his fist into it as he growled to nobody in general. Inko had gone to work at Muzudafu General, having to work longer hours in order to pay off the amount of debt he had to pay off. His face flushed a little in embarrassment. It took a lot to embarrass him, and that small, short woman had been able to do so all within a matter of minutes after arriving at that strange hospital. Shaking his head out of that, he decided to head towards the nearest source of the power that his scouter could sense in the area. He took off into the sky, a white trail of flaming energy trailing after him. Aldra High School, 5 minutes later. The flight over towards wherever the scouter showed had the largest congregated amount of power levels in the area showed a large building. Looking through the building, both using his ability to sense the energy of those within the building and his scouter, he realized where he was. Izuku had stated earlier that morning that she goes to a school called Aldra High, and since he could sense her energy within this very building, he believed that this was Aldra High School. If he had to make a guess about this place, he probably would have thought originally to just destroy it completely and move on with his day. But since he was currently paying back Inko with training her daughter, he needed to stay his hand. Not to mention, from what Izuku and Inko reacted to how he killed people without mercy and without a second thought, he really needed to hold back against this world. He moved his eyes across the windows from his position in the sky. His scouter beeped, immediately locking onto her energy signal that was within the building itself. Looking at the scouter to see what her current power level was, what he found was greatly disturbing to him. Her power level was only at if she wanted to become a hero, she needed a power level of around at least 55, this would most assuredly not do. He was about to land on the ground and practically pull her out of the school in order to train her when his scouter beeped again. Looking at the scouter, he found a power level which was massively higher than Izuku's by a wide margin. Sitting at a power level of around 35 was a boy with ash blonde hair, and he was staring at Izuku with a very not kind expression as his hands erupted in a few small sparks. Bardock's mind went at 100 miles an hour to figure out this ability. If Inko's ability was to telekinetically pull things that weigh incredibly light, his must be to cause massive explosions. Those sparks are like rocks clashing against one another to create a fire. Bardock thought to himself as he prepared to land. As he floated towards the ground, he paid little mind to the people who could see him on the street. His tail lashed about behind him as soon as his feet softly crushed the grass he stood upon, and he moved towards the front doors of the building. His scouter kept itself locked onto Izuku's energy signature as he practically broke down the doors to the school's entrance and moved through the entrance. He barely heard the sound of the woman at the front desk sarcastically tell him that he's not supposed to be on campus grounds before he turned around the corner, moving towards the closest set of stairs. Moving up the stairs with the speed of a man on a mission, he moved towards where the class Izuku was within. His scouter beeped again, The boy's energy spiked at around a power level of 55 this time, and Bardock knew that he needed to reach Izuku as fast as possible. By the time he reached the classroom where Izuku was in, he pushed the doors of the classroom open and the doors smashed into the wall to the right, causing everyone to look at him. The expressions on each of the students within the room was confused and bordered on awe as the man walked through the room. His tail wrapped itself around his waist as he slowly made his way towards Bakugo and his bully friends. The trio holding Izuku against a desk as one of them held a branding iron, which was dangerously close to her open skin back. If the rage in his eyes wasn't able to be seen before, it was clearly seen now as veins appeared on his arms when he pushed Bakugo and his bully friends away from Izuku, who immediately noticed their presence gone. Blinking her eyes to stand back upright, she found a presence behind her that was very familiar, and turning to look at who it was, she found Bardock standing behind her. H's hand was then placed on her right shoulder, holding her tight as she looked at him in awe and confusion. What are you doing here, Bardock-san? Izuku asked as Bardock glared down at her. School was taking too long, and I wanted to check up on you. Come to find out, I see those three about to brand you. Bardock growled as Izuku made to move in front of him to block the man from the boys. Who the F are you, old man? Bakugo's voice called out. Gosh dang it, Katsuki. Izuku mumbled, just loud enough for Bardock to hear. Your name is Katsuki, correct? Bardock questioned. Yeah, what about it, fucker? Katsuki questioned, as Bardock raised a palm to him. Everyone in the classroom watched as a large orb of energy formed in Bardock's hand. Bakugo immediately recognized that this was a threat as he prepared to use his own quirk in order to try and intimidate Bardock back. But when he went to use his quirk, he suddenly found an immense pressure being put upon his back before finding himself slammed into the ground with a foot on his back. Looking over his shoulder, he found Bardock having switched himself up to restraining him on the ground, and Katsuki made the attempt to break free from this hold but couldn't. The young boy was at a loss at how he was taken down with no kind of way to react. Your ability is to make explosions from your hands, correct? Bardock questioned. Yeah, did that FNG Deku tell you about it? Katsuki growled, struggling under Bardock's foot. How about I take that ability away from you? Snap your hands to the point that they cannot be healed back into their original position. Bardock threatened, causing Katsuki to freeze in place. You wouldn't dare. Katsuki grunted from below him. Katsuki suddenly felt himself be raised from the ground, a brown object wrapping around his throat. Looking down, he found that it was actually a tail. Oh, I have no qualms with causing destruction to you. You see that girl over there, the one you blatantly called Deku? Bardock questioned, forcing the boy when he wouldn't look. She, yes. Katsuki grunted, feeling the tail tighten against his throat. You are not to lay a single finger on her body, nor will you even decide to try and brand her like you were planning on. Bardock growled, pulling the boy close to him. And if I don't follow this threat? Bakugo grunted back at him. At this point, the teacher for the class had entered the room and looked at the scene before himself. His eyes were looking between the commotion and the students with rising fear before Bardock noticed him and used telekinesis to pull the man to his hand. His hand glowed an ominous yellow color before a small blast killed the man in an instant, causing his shredded clothes and a bit of blood to splatter on the ground within the room. Izuku stared at the blatant display of murder in her classroom, and she didn't know what to say or do. Bardock had been one who touted himself as a warrior, but even she wouldn't stoop so far as to kill someone. And he did it without a single care in the world. Her body began to tremble before Bardock released Bakugo, who stared at the teacher who just died in front of him. If you don't follow my demands, then you will end up just like that weasel of a man. Dead. Bardock growled before walking to Izuku, who flinched at him standing before him. I am pulling you away from this building. It's clearly unsafe for you, Bardock said, before grabbing Izuku and lifting her over his shoulder. Tears fell from her eyes at the sheer embarrassment she felt at being in such a position. Nobody in the class made to stop them as Bardock left the room, and it wouldn't be until later on in the afternoon, long after Bardock left the building with Izuku, that police would arrive. 0W0. Dagoba Municipal Beach Park, 1 hour later. When Bardock softly planted Izuku on the sand, Her body trembled before falling to her knees. Her mind was a raging storm of emotions, mostly bordering on rage as she just lost the chance to even go to a public school since she would be seen as an accessory to murder. Tears were fluttering from her eyes as she clenched her hands in the sand beneath her knees as quiet sobs could be heard from her. The sound of the sand being crushed not too far away from her and moving towards her was heard, and she looked up at Bardock, who stared down at her with an impassive expression on his face. When looking down at Izuku, Bardock didn't even flinch at the amount of sadness in them. Nor did he react to the clearly not well-trained punch that landed on his chin surprisingly fast from such a short girl. Izuku just screamed over and over as she punched his chin as much as she could with her weak arms, and eventually she was grabbed by the arms and pulled close to the man who had effectively saved her from bullying and placed her on a watch list. "What in the hell is wrong with you?" Bardock yelled, his anger flaring. "What's wrong with me? What the F is wrong with you?" Izuku screamed at him, pointing a finger at his face. "Did you think that it's okay to casually kill someone in broad daylight?" Izuku yelled, emotions running high. He was a weasel, nothing more nothing less. He hasn't done anything to help you from your case of being picked on, right? Bardock questioned. "Well, no, but that doesn't mean you should kill him," Izuku retorted after stuttering. "On my world, when someone picks on the weak, that is a death sentence. On my planet, if you picked on the weak, it was to make sure that they could become stronger. You fought them in order to teach a lesson. What that boy and his friends were doing, it wasn't that. They were trying to beat you down." Bardock replied curtly. "That doesn't mean you had to kill someone completely innocent to the scene at hand." Izuku yelled. "Would you rather me have allowed you to become branded?" Bardock suddenly asked as Izuku paused. Izuku went silent at that, as much as she would have loved for that teacher to not have been killed. Being branded meant that she wouldn't have been able to get that off her body unless she had surgery to have it taken off, and that would leave a scar. Shaking her head, she glared at Bardock before trembling in fear of him as she spoke in a low tone. "It would have been better than becoming an accessory to murder. I can't become a hero for sure now," Izuku said, falling to her knees again. "There's that word again, murder. What's so wrong with killing someone who was clearly not kind to you?" Bardock questioned. "Because our planet has laws, Bardock? Our laws keep us from causing chaos and destruction. Laws prevent us from making sure that families don't get to see their children anymore. Laws make sure that we can actually protect people." Izuku screamed at Bardock. Sheet. "They can't become a hero anymore. I'm so dead." Izuku mumbled to herself as she went into a panic attack. Bardock stood across from her as Izuku went into a panic attack. He had no clue how to fix this. All he'd known was how to fight and kill an enemy, spare them at the best and killing at the worst. But he'd never seen an actual panic attack. Those who had medical conditions in the Saiyan army similar to this were always put down, since that made them appear far weaker than they actually were. King Vegeta made sure of that. But seeing Izuku enter a panic attack right here and right now made him feel as though he missed something. His hands clenched at his sides as he tried to figure out whether or not he should help her or if he should stay away from her right now in order for her to sort it out. It wouldn't be until the sound of clicking heels from the pavement above that Bardock looked up to find Inko rushing over to them, her expression cold and looking at him directly. Seeing that look on Inko made Bardock blink at her in confusion. It wouldn't be until he felt his heart slowly trying to pull itself out of place that he realized what was happening. Inko was making full on her promise of pain as he felt his breathing slow down until he placed a palm over his chest in order to try and force his energy to keep his heart from being pulled out. When that woman was in her full Mother Bear mode, she could be a powerful warrior. Planet Vegeta would have valued her ability since it would be a clean kill. Falling to his knees, Bardock found himself staring at Inko as the woman pulled her daughter into a hug. Whispering sweet nothings into her ear as Izuku trembled and rocked back and forth in her mom's waiting arms, it wouldn't be for a few minutes longer that Inko would pull away from her daughter before staring at Bardock. Inko would speak to Izuku in a low tone, causing Izuku to leave the area as the woman walked over to Bardock all on her own. The man appreciated how her hand had stopped clenching itself around his heart, allowing him the time to pant heavily and stand back upright without a single care in the world. You are going to tell me why you thought it was okay to enter a school in the middle of class and kill a random person. Inko growled as Bardock spoke. That teacher wasn't really going to help you, daughter. He wasn't even present when he should have for class, seeing as how an ash-blonde boy was trying to brand your daughter in the very same classroom. Bardock retorted, placing his fists on his hips. That doesn't excuse the fact that you murdered a man in broad daylight. At least do it at night. Inko growled at him. The silence between the two was palpable. Inko's short frame compared to Bardock's towering form was very ironic. The short woman scolding a man who was nearly twice her height. What do you mean do it at night? Bardock questioned. At least then you wouldn't have been caught. You were seen by 19 students, my daughter included. Not to mention how they might have cameras looking through the building. Inko practically all but yelled. I saved your daughter from a place that seemed to be trying to break her spirit. Bardock yelled back. Had I not been there, they would have branded your daughter, something that would have probably required surgery to get, and she'd be forever scarred by said surgery. What makes you think that killing someone is the best way to make them stop? You practically caused mental trauma to 20 students in that classroom, my daughter included in that, mister. Inko growled back at him. The two's fury was palpable, and it wasn't until Bardock turned away from her with his back facing towards her that Inko did something very stupid. She grabbed his tail and squeezed as hard as she could. The reaction was instant. Bardock glared over his shoulder at her, fury all but hidden behind his eyes. But he wasn't attacking her out of retaliation, he merely turned around and walked up to her, making his height intimidate her more than the fury that was etching itself onto his features. His hand went out to grab her throat, but he decided to grab her shirt and lift her to where she was eye level with him, as he basically was all but screaming at her face. Had I not been in there, she would have been branded with something that told her to kill herself. Do you really want your daughter to hold something on her body that tells her that she doesn't deserve to live, Inko Midoriya? Bardock calmly spoke. Inko remained silent as she tried to think of a retort, anything to justify not killing someone. But no matter what she tried to think of, she couldn't. After all, it was against the law to bait someone into committing suicide. It was something even the Board of Education looked at very seriously, no matter the situation. But as she stared into Bardock's eyes, she found that he wasn't even lying about what he stated before she opened her mouth to speak. Only to find that she couldn't. Your daughter was being branded with Japanese letters. My scouter read what it meant, and it basically said that she was already dead. Bardock growled. I don't know what came over me in that moment, but I decided that Izuku will be under my direct protection. To keep her away from that kind of influence. When those final words left Bardock's mouth, he felt himself lower Inko to the ground as he turned away and flew off into the distance. Midoriya Apartment, Mizudafu, Japan, 2264. My notebooks were full of rules. Rules about how heroes act, how they talk, and how they save. Bardock broke every single one of them in 6 seconds. Now, the world calls him a monster, and they call me his shadow. I guess it's time to find out what's hiding in the dark. In the hours following the events of her social studies teacher being killed, Izuku had spent every waking moment after the beach inside her room. Her legs were pulled up to her chest as she felt all the weight of the day pile up on top of her. Bardock had taken the one thing she had that was her normal and astronomically blasted it to smithereens, and then some, even if she had no social life. Nobody would befriend her now. Especially not after Bardock had left the school carrying her over his shoulder as though she were his accomplice who couldn't even leave the crime scene correctly. Her breath shuddered the more she thought about how to even talk to Bardock about his actions. Sure, he was an alien, so he wasn't entirely at fault. But the way he killed her teacher in such a way that made her feel so insignificant that she had no clue what to do. It pained her because her mind was struggling to figure out how to even reach that level of power with a mere flick of her wrist, and the training that entailed. Izuku was a young woman who prioritized all life and wanted to save everyone with a smile. Just like the man who she idolized for over a decade and a half, and she watched someone kill another human being in front of her without mercy or remorse. The way Bardock spoke in such a way that it was trivial for him, how he spoke that he was protecting her. Sure, it was nice to have someone protect her for once. But she never wanted anyone to die because he was protecting her. She continued to think about what in the hell was going on in her life, until the television in the living room turned on. Her mother was sure to be home at this point in time, and Izuku couldn't help but move towards the living room in order to see what was on the news. Peering her head into the hallway towards the living room itself, she tiptoed towards the living room of the apartment, only to find her mother staring at the television with a neutral expression on her face. The woman didn't even look that surprised that this had happened, just exasperated that it happened this early. Izuku called out, though she didn't know how to continue. Yes, Izuku? Inko asked, looking to her daughter. And seeing Izuku wearing the tired expression filled with red eyes and tears still falling caused the woman to pause the television. Moving over to her daughter and pulling her into a tight hug, the two Midoriya women let their emotions run free as they fell to their knees. Inko rubbing her daughter's back in order to help her calm down from the events of the day, as much as they wanted to blame Bardock for all this happening. They both knew that he would have done something like this eventually, it was only a matter of time before he'd slip up about it, and they never thought it'd happen this soon. 2 officers came by earlier today. They wanted to ask if you knew Bardock. Inko said, looking at her hands after pulling away from Izuku. Did you tell them H's name? Izuku asked as Inko stayed quiet. The silence continued until Inko spoke in a quiet tone. No. I didn't tell them his name, it's not because I wish to protect him. It's because they wouldn't be capable of catching him anyway. How? Izuku asked, confused. Izuku, dear, Bardock is capable of flying. The only one they'd be capable of sending towards catching him is pro-hero Hawks, and even he wouldn't be fast enough to keep up with him. Inko said, as Izuku nodded. Okay, so what should we do? I don't know if I should continue trying for you. I'd be seen as an accomplice. Izuku said, rubbing her forehead. Actually, the police don't think that you're an accomplice. They believe that you were an attempted kidnapping and you barely managed to escape from him. Inko replied as Izuku sighed. Great, just great. Even more things for Kaken to talk to me about. Izuku mumbled. What was that, Izuku? Inko asked as Izuku shook her head. It's nothing. What do you want me to do about this, Mom? Izuku asked, concerned. I personally think you should still train under him. He has a lot of things he could teach you. Inko said, sipping some tea. Are you crazy? Izuku called out, slightly fearful. No, I am most certainly not crazy, Izuku. But if you look at it from my view, if you train under him, you might become strong enough to take him on and possibly place him in prison once everything is all well and done. Inko said as Izuku thought to herself. As much as I wouldn't want to do that, do I have much of a choice right now? Izuku asked, confused. Not really, Izuku. This might be the only way you could become a hero. You're not being seen as an accomplice, and you can become strong enough to achieve your dreams without having to deal with quirk exhaustion, only natural exhaustion. Inko said, looking quite happy with herself. But what about him? Izuku asked as Inko thought about it. He flew away probably to deal with tension. He'll be back in a few minutes. Inko said, brushing her off. Okay. Izuku mumbled before turning to the television. Dagoba Municipal Beach Park, 2 hours later. Izuku moved towards the beach. Her mother had decided to head into the city in order to collect groceries. The short plump woman knowing full well that a Saiyan's diet will consist of high-calorie meals and that her daughter will adopt a similar diet to keep up. Izuku made her way through the heavy streets of silence as she finally arrived at the beach, hundreds of piles of trash sitting around the beach and taking away the beautiful view it once gave. She pushed her way through multiple piles of the trash as she thought more and more about her mother's words. You could train under him in order to one day put a stop to his actions. Her mother's words fluttered through her mind. Shaking her head slightly at that, she found herself back on top of the fridge that started her admittedly fearful life. Staring up at the sky, the sun was setting over the horizon as stars were beginning to reveal themselves in the sky itself. Each one shinned brightly in the air as she raised a palm up to the sky itself, as though one of those stars would drop from the sky and randomly give her a superpower she'd wanted since she was sighing sadly to herself, She pointedly ignored the sound of boots crunching against metal and sand that made their way over to her. She knew who it was already. Bardock stood across from her position on the fridge as he stared at the horizon with her. Neither said a word to the other, as though they were trying to figure out what to say in order to make the other feel better. His hands clenched at his sides the more he thought about it. His mouth opened and closed as he tried to formulate the words needed in order to try and explain himself for how he murdered her schoolteacher without a single care about whether she wanted it to happen or not. "I'm not good at these feelings things," Bardock suddenly said, causing Izuku to look at him. "I'm not either," Izuku mumbled, pulling her legs into her chest. "But I do know what bullying looks like," Bardock continued. Izuku stayed silent as Bardock waited for her to respond, but when she didn't, he took that as his chance to continue. "I'm not sure how your world's laws work, and I will endeavor to try and follow them. But can you please go back to your calm but happy self?" Bardock questioned, his tail lashing about behind him. Unknown to Bardock, Izuku's eyes watched that tail lash about behind him, and she assumed that his apology here was embarrassing for him to say, since from what she could understand in the little amount of time she knew him, Saiyans weren't one to apologize for their actions. They were one to take what was required of something and bend it to their will, even if it meant death. Sighing to herself quietly, she hopped off the top of the refrigerator and stood before him, her back to his face, as she spoke in a low tone. "If I am to train under you, Bardock, I need you to promise me one thing," Izuku said, her tone low but loud. "What is it?" Bardock questioned, his own tone low. "I need you to make sure that whenever you enter a fight, because I know you sure as hell will, make sure that you don't kill them," Izuku said, turning to look at him. "I can't make that promise," Bardock said, as Izuku thought about it. "Have you ever tried lowering your power in order to match the power of those who are around yourself?" Izuku asked as Bardock blinked. "I have deceived my enemies by lowering my power level, yes. What about it?" Bardock questioned. "When you enter a fight on Earth, I need you to lower your power to just enough that it's double of whoever you're fighting. That way you're not killing them and just knocking them out," Izuku said as Bardock thought about it. "You want me to hold back against potential rivals here?" Bardock questioned. "Bardock, nobody on Earth are Saiyans like you. We're humans, we aren't exactly durable. Well, except those who have damage reduction quirks or shock absorption and negation quirk users," Izuku said, before correcting. With those words, Bardock thought about it. As much as he wanted to kill his rival here on Earth, her words broke through to his mind. Earthlings are surprisingly easy to kill, especially due to their low chances of surviving a hit from him. And the more he thought about it, the easier it would be to get a handle on his overwhelming power he could hold over others. So he looked down to her eyes as he held a hand out to her, and Izuku held out her own, and when their hands connected, their deal was made with the other. "I shall endeavor to make sure I keep my power lowered enough to knock my enemies out," Bardock said as Izuku nodded. "Then what are you going to teach me first about becoming a warrior?" Izuku asked. Bardock stood there for a moment before a smirk appeared on his mouth. He glanced at all the trash on the beach before looking at Izuku. He then spoke to her in a tone that held the wisdom of a man who's lived for 100 years. "I want you to clean the beach of all the trash that you can see. When you're done, we'll begin your actual training," Bardock said as Izuku blinked. I can do that, but why do you want me to clean the beach?" Izuku asked as Bardock smirked. "It'll be your way of paying back this community. Not only that, but it's what the heroes of old in your world used to do, right?" Bardock questioned with a raised eyebrow. "Oh, it'll also be a way to build muscle," Izuku called out, before rushing to a nearby pile. "I hope I know what I'm doing," Bardock thought to himself. 0W0. Aldra High School, 3 hours earlier. The police arrived at the school with not a whole lot of fanfare. Their eyes looked upon the school as though they prepared to find that the building was destroyed by some random bomb rather than looking as pristine as it always had. A man stepped out of the police vehicle as he put on his hat and overcoat before making his way through the school's courtyard, a neutral expression on his face. He took in the exact dimensions of the school's grounds, as well as the students still milling about waiting for their parents to pick them up and take them home after the events of the. Entering the school, his friend from the precinct, Officer Sansa walked alongside him through the halls. The halls were silent as they made their way towards the classroom where the complete annihilation of a schoolteacher in front of 20 students before one was kidnapped happened. Sansa pulled him through the details, how the class were waiting for their teacher to arrive and how some of the students seemed to be omitting a certain event that caused the man to murder their teacher in cold blood. The cat officer had spoken more about how the man had appeared humanoid from the cameras in the hall when he walked through. I'll need to see those security cameras myself, Sansa. For now I'll need to overlook the crime scene on my own. Be sure to give Eraserhead and Midnight a call for me. The man said as Sansa nodded. Of course, Tsukachi. Sansa happily meowed before running off. Turning around another corner, Tsukachi managed to reach the classroom he was searching for. His dark eyes watched over the silent halls again as he moved towards the room where the crime scene was located. Down the hall the students were being questioned further as he entered the scene himself. Opening the classroom door he found a few forensic scientists in the room itself testing the blood and ashes. He knelt on the ground before taking in the scene in front of him, his eyes narrowing in suspicion as he glared at the blood splatter. What quirk do you think did this? He muttered, one of the forensic scientists speaking up. We think it's an energy manipulation quirk, one that's powerful enough to eviscerate upon contact. They said, pointing to the blood. Not only that, but the act of the murder was point blank. The teacher never stood a chance to defend himself. The forensics stated. All right, do we have an identity for the victim? Tsukachi questioned. Yes, we have a Takashi Himurashi. He is a social studies teacher for Aldra High School, once Aldra Junior High. The forensics man said. All right, do we have any DNA results on who killed him? Tsukachi asked, standing up from the ground. Nothing at this moment, all we know is that we're looking for a man who has a brown monkey tail. Similar to that of a macaque monkey, so he's probably got the tail because of a family mutation quirk. The forensic scientist said, before frowning. What's wrong? Tsukachi questioned. Based on the video evidence, the person who came here was humanoid in appearance. He had tan skin, was relatively tall, around 6 foot in height and had that tail wrapped around his waist as though he were protecting it. The forensics said, before focusing back on their task. All right, thank you for informing me about that. Tsukachi said, before leaving into the hall. When he left the room, Tsukachi moved through the silent halls towards the entrance of the school. Sansa was collecting the video footage of the murder happening in real time, so it would only take a small amount of time before he'd have all the evidence in order to find the person in question. But as he turned around another corner, he found the two people he desperately needed for assistance in this case. Eraserhead and Midnight were leaning against the walls in the hall as they seemingly spoke in hushed tones. When they noticed his arrival, they stood up and looked to him for information. Tsukachi! Eraserhead drawled out, tiredly. It's good to see you again, dear. Midnight said, cracking her whip. It's good to see you both as well. I need your help with this case I'm doing currently. Tsukachi said, as Eraserhead nodded. What do you need? The man questioned, leaning against the wall again. I need information on a man who stands at 6 feet in height, muscular in appearance and wearing a strange armor. Also, he has a strange macaque tail sticking out from his lower back, so it might be a weakness for him. We're not sure who he is, but we do know he obliterated a teacher in this school without remorse. Tsukachi said, as the trio walked to his vehicle. That's terrible. What was the person's name? Midnight questioned. His name was Takashi Himurashi, social studies teacher for Aldra Junior High, before it rebranded and became Aldra High School. Tsukachi informed as Midnight nodded. Anything else we need to look for? Eraserhead questioned, his tone clipped. Yeah. Apparently he kidnapped a young girl by the name Midoriya Izuku. Short girl, medium-length forest green hair and emerald eyes. Got freckles in the shape of diamonds on her cheeks, can't miss her. Tsukachi said, as Eraserhead scoffed. That's pretty plain looking, we'd never find her in normal society. Eraserhead retorted. Well, you better start looking then. Tsukachi retorted back. Can you give me their address? Maybe the man brought her back home? Midnight questioned, as Tsukachi nodded. I'll forward it onto the group chat. Be sure to inform me if the girl is safe. Tsukachi said, as Midnight nodded and walked away. This left Eraserhead and Tsukachi all alone in the parking lot, and when they drove to the precinct, silence prevailed over them. Nothing could be said between the two as they stared at the darkening sky above them. It wouldn't be until later on in the drive that Eraserhead would question him. "Did you question the students?" Eraserhead asked. "I'll be getting their questioning footage from the officers who were asking them whilst I looked over the crime scene." Tsukachi replied, paying attention to the road. "Good, because we might be getting a reason as to why the man killed a teacher like that in broad daylight." Eraserhead said as he huffed. "What reason could garner a man to kill another man?" Tsukachi asked. "Who knows, but for all we know he could have been a very protective father who had enough." Eraserhead grumbled before falling asleep. Dagoba Municipal Beach Park, midnight. Back on the beach, Izuku could be seen moving a bunch of trash from the sandy shoreline. Her face was covered in sweat, her shirt already being soaked with sweat as she'd attempted to pull it off in order to wipe away the sweat itself only to soak it more. Her breathing was low, but at the same time heavy as she attempted to lift a heavy tire from a truck that she'd deconstructed with Bardock's mentorship. She hauled it across the sand, making a long line through it as Bardock watched from the air as she struggled to move it towards the higher area near a trash bin that Bardock just so happened to place there. Bardock stared at Izuku as she hauled specific items up the bank and onto higher ground. From what he could see, her baggy clothing were going to be a major problem for her moving forward if they were just going to hold her down. Sighing to himself, he used his scouter to call Inko in order to question whether or not she could get Izuku some different clothes for her training. When he used his scouter to call Inko, he found that the woman was in the middle of a shopping trip of her own. "This is Inko Midoriya." Inko's voice warmly entered his hearing. "Inko, I'm not sure if you know this or not, but your daughter is going to need clothes that allow her to move but not reveal too much about her body. Can you get her that?" Bardock questioned. "I'm certain I have some old clothes that she can wear. Is there something wrong?" Inko asked, confused. "Yeah, her baggy clothing is weighing her down from her job. She's cleaning Dagoba Municipal Beach to make the place better like a hero should. But her clothing is holding her back. Can you have her wearing something different tomorrow?" Bardock questioned. "I'm sure I can find something tomorrow. I'm about to leave the store soon. How much should I prepare my bank account in terms of food?" Inko asked, curiously. "Enough to make sure you have leftovers for after dinner." Bardock replied, before ending the connection. His scouter beeped as he noticed a pretty high power level moving towards the Midoriya apartment. Looking down to Izuku, he watched as the young woman moved the scraps of metal and vehicle parts across the beach before taking off towards the apartment. Checking the power level of the person again, he decided to hide his tail behind his back, just to be sure that he isn't questioned about the murder that happened earlier that day. He even grabbed a hat from a random passerby who had cowlick blonde hair. They yelled at him before sighing to themselves and walking away with a happy smile. When Bardock arrived at the apartment, he soon found the person. Their power level spoke about them reaching around 185, pretty high for most heroes and heroines on the planet, but that was barely even a 16th of his full power. He landed just outside of the apartment door, leaning against the wall, and waited for the woman to arrive outside of the apartment complex. When he felt her presence nearby, he looked over at her as she froze in place, staring at him in what must have been confusion and preparation for interrogation. He watched as her hand began to excrete a small pink cloud that he used his key to briefly push away. The woman realized what was happening and prepared herself for a fight when Bardock opened up the front door. "If you're here for a talk, enter. I don't have all day," Bardock warned as he walked through the door. "Who are you?" Midnight questioned, her tone heavy with suspicion. "I'm the man you're looking for," Bardock said, before closing the door behind himself. Midoriya Family Apartment, Mizudafu, Japan, 2264. "I've interrogated killers, lunatics, and monsters. Usually they have an excuse. But this man? He looked at me with eyes that had seen empires burn and offered no apology. It wasn't the tale or the power that terrified me, it was the fact that he treated a cold-blooded execution like he was just taking out the trash." Midnight wasn't prepared to find the actual villain who attacked a school and kidnapped a civilian girl today. She was only coming to this apartment to see if she could find out if the young woman was actively all right and safe. But to find the very person she and Eraserhead had been searching for, on account of Tsukachi informing them about how dangerous the individual was. She wasn't prepared at all to have a one-on-one conversation with them, much less with the man who looked as though he could bench press All Might with a mere finger. "You coming?" Bardock questioned. Midnight jumped at the low tone of the man before rushing inside the building with him. As soon as the door shut behind her softly, she found that this apartment was exactly the same one that she was supposed to visit in order to check up on the Midoriya family. She looked at multiple pictures within the main hallway, finding pictures of a mother and daughter standing next to one another with smiles on their faces. But over time, she watched as the pictures showed Izuku not having as many smiles on her face before reaching the picture where it showed a 17-year-old Izuku standing next to her mother looking very scared. Is there a reason as to why Midoriya looks scared in this picture? Midnight questioned as Bardock stared at the picture himself. This, based on what I know, is from about a few months ago, before I showed up in their lives. Bardock growled, glaring at the picture. She has been bullied by that school you all are investigating in search of myself. And do you think this allows you to enter such an establishment and kill a renowned teacher within its halls? Midnight questioned back. No. And I have my reasons for killing that whelp. Bardock retorted with a huff. He sat down on the couch within the living room, and Midnight sat down in the recliner seat across from him. Her hands folded themselves under her chin as she waited for Bardock to give his reasons, but for some reason he stayed quiet. That was until she noticed a small device on Bardock's eye that was beeping, showing strange symbols on it as she blinked at him in confusion. What's that device you're currently using? Midnight questioned, curiously. This is my scouter. It allows me to find the power levels of anything and anyone in the vicinity. Bardock said, glaring at the woman. Who is it looking for? Midnight asked. The one you are currently looking for. She's currently at Dagoba Municipal Beach Park. She's training under myself since nobody else wishes to train her. Bardock said, giving her an unimpressed expression. What does it do? Midnight asked, curiosity entering her tone. It senses the current power levels of those within the area. I thought I made myself clear on that. Bardock questioned back. Well, can you give me an example of these so-called power levels? Midnight asked. Her question was followed by a few beeps, before a final consecutive 3 beeps was heard. She watched Bardock's eyes glance over at the green screen covering his black iris and read it to himself in a silent tone. Then his smirk appeared on his face as he leant forward and gave her a sadistic grin. The nearest person I scanned was yourself, woman. And I have to say, a power level of 185? Not bad, imperceptibly. But not bad for a woman. Bardock said with a growing smirk. Power level of 185? Surely you're jesting. Midnight said, looking at Bardock, only to find that his expression was deadly serious, even with that sadistic grin on his face. So, can you give me your reason for killing a teacher at Aldra High School? Midnight asked, wanted to get some answers. Over the past few days that I've been around this family, the Midoriyas as you call them, I've noticed some strange behaviors of the girl. She's meek, very introverted, and most importantly, fearful of those around herself. I at first believed it was due to her personality, meek and very apologetic. Bardock started before taking a deep breath. But that was before I decided to check her memories. Bardock said, as Midnight interjected. So your quirk is memory checking? Midnight asked. No. I have none of what your people call quirks. The only power I have is that of the Saiyan race, a prideful race of beings who can make destroying planets look as though it were mere child's play. Bardock said, his eyes narrowing at Midnight. You're saying you have enough power to destroy a planet? Midnight asked, curious. Yes, and in order to keep that kind of power in check I need to keep my power low. Bardock said, before Midnight nodded before getting back to her original question. You can continue with your reason for killing a teacher. Midnight said, waving her hand in front of him in a soft gesture. What are your thoughts of bullying at the place you work? Bardock questioned, placing his hands under his chin folded. The place where I work is UA Hero Academic University. We do not tolerate any kind of bullying, we give a 3-strike rule. If you do not follow those 3 strikes in order to better yourself, you are either placed in another course or outright expelled. Midnight said with shocking seriousness. Yeah, well, this Aldra High School. It and its entire student base were constantly bullying the girl for years. I'm not sure how long it is, but it's been happening since she was a mere infant, around the age of 7. Bardock informed. That's a serious claim. Do you have anything or any way to prove that she was being bullied? Midnight questioned, her tone serious. When I was coming to her school to check up on her, she was approached by 3 boys. I was floating in the air outside of the school itself, and I saw them preparing something nefarious. When I entered the school itself, reaching her classroom, they were about to brand her. Bardock said, as Midnight's expression paled. Do you know where the branding iron went? Midnight asked, concerned. I destroyed it at the same time as I killed that teacher, before pulling the girl out of that school by force. Bardock explained. There were a great many things that Midnight was prepared for, a lunatic stating that it was the government's fault for his villainy. How a villain's created through the actions of their parents and their peers, how the only reason they kill is to make the world a better place. Hell, she'd even come across Stain multiple times, and the man had called her a true hero a few times but didn't like her sultry attitude towards villains and heroes alike. She'd even heard that Stain's reason for killing heroes was because of the fact that none of them were true heroes. It's extremely rare that a hero is called a true hero by that vigilante-turned-villain. But to hear Bardock of all people essentially state that he killed a teacher in cold blood without remorse. She wasn't prepared for that, and as her face paled, Bardock continued without any kind of remorse for her thought process trying to keep up. That teacher wasn't even in the classroom when the bullying was happening. He only showed up at the tail end of it, as though he were outside waiting for it all to end before he could cause problems for the girl. I took out a threat to the well-being of that girl, nothing more, nothing less. Bardock explained. And I have every reason to believe that he was a part of the bullying that was happening in that school. And if he wasn't the only one, I personally believe everyone in that school is an accessory to it. Bardock continued, before finishing. That doesn't mean you have to kill him. Midnight said, looking him in the eye. That may be so, but at best he'd get a slap on the wrist as though he were a mere child, and at worst lose his teaching license. Bardock said, before glaring at the ground. I care little for your pitiful world's laws and regulations. All it is just a band-aid covering the real problems with the country you all protect so much. Bardock said, as Midnight couldn't help but want to hear his reasoning further. And what is the real problem of our country? Midnight questioned as Bardock smirked. The real problem with your country is the issue of constant bullying of innocent children. Those who have powers that seem villainous in nature but could be used for heroism. The bigotry towards those without any form of superpower at all, same for those who don't look human. Bardock said, glaring into Midnight's eyes. Anything else? Midnight asked, as Bardock's smirk increased. The simple fact that your people despise those without these so-called quirks, that they will spend every waking moment trying to break that person's soul. The girl I'm currently training, she was born quirkless as your people call it. And every single day of her life, after being diagnosed quirkless, she has been nothing but abused, looked down upon, and most importantly beaten just because she wishes to become a hero like her idol. Bardock said, as Midnight just blinked. She wishes to become a hero? Midnight asked curiously. Yes, and because nobody wants to train a quirkless hero into its creation, they pass her by. I've seen something in her that nobody else has in the entire life she's lived, aside from her mother, of course. I see the power of a warrior within her, someone who will not stop at anything in order to get what she wants, even if she has to turn to villainy just to get it. Bardock said before leaning back in the couch. But of course, nobody cares about her dreams unless it has something to do with destroying it. They only care about the level of danger it could do to your society, since you all laud quirks as godlike powers. A quirkless person entering the Harrowed Heroics course at your school seems like a pipe dream, if not that more of a threat to their actual lives as pro-heroes. Bardock explained. Couldn't really say anything after that, She ended their conversation before leaving the apartment. She had a lot of things to think about and she needed to be alone in order to figure out what she needed to do about that since she had no idea what to do. Sure, she could try and arrest the man in the apartment, but from what she could tell, he wasn't lying when he stated he could easily destroy planets. He was completely serious when he stated that, so she had to take it at face value, and Midnight decided to do some research on alien life forms that could have come to planet Earth in the last 40 years. She wouldn't find any when she got home to do her research, but it was worth a shot. 0W0. Dagoba Municipal Beach Park, 2 hours after conversation. On the beach, Izuku could be seen moving a bunch of trash across it towards the dumpster. Each piece was heavy, but enough for her to push herself to her limits and beyond it in order to get stronger. Bardock's training of cleaning the beach is a good idea, but at the same time she realizes that she doesn't have the stamina to keep doing this for very long, even if it's been about 2 hours since he'd left her alone. She tried to move a giant refrigerator earlier, but couldn't be due to how heavy it was and decided to take care of that at a later time. But she certainly felt the burn in each and every part of her body from lifting trash and scrap metal. She even had taken to finding a small book about tinkering with scrap metal in order to create things to assist her in her time as a potential hero-to-be. She kept the book on hand as she stared at the countless diagrams of what she could create, ranging from a stun gun out of all the machine scraps or even making a metallic bow staff. As much as she wanted to create that kind of weapon though, she wanted to focus on cleaning the beach as much as she could so she could get into physical training with Bardock. Even if she wasn't very happy with the Saiyan man, she could see where he came from. A planet where any action towards another of their own race was seen as a plight, even if it was centered around them bullying one another, death was a consequence. And she decided to think of the teacher for her class's death as more of a consequence of her not being strong enough to prevent it from happening. It was her fault for not speaking up to Bardock about not killing anyone. It was her fault that someone got killed because she didn't open her mouth in order to stop it. And because of this thought process, she had managed to clear a large hole in the trash piles. Looking all around herself, the burning sensation in her muscles made her feel accomplished. She felt the presence of Bardock coming, causing her to turn around, finding Bardock floating in the air looking over the portion of the trash beach she'd cleaned. His expression was filled with pride seeing this, but he didn't let it be voiced, causing her to pout a little as he landed on the ground not too far away. Though his eyes landed on the small book she had in her hand at the moment, before they gained a slight recognition before focusing on her body. Because of his eyes lingering on her body, even though she were wearing baggy clothing, Izuku covered certain portions of it. Mainly her chest and core, as Bardock slowly walked over to her and checked her physical form more than any other person in her life, aside her mother, did. His eyes trailed over her curves through her baggy clothing before he looked over the entirety of her legs and arms before coming to a conclusion in his mind. You're going to need to do runs in the morning. About 2 kilometers at best. Bardock said as Izuku blinked. Why? She asked. Because if you're going to clear this beach as fast as possible, you're going to need to have enough stamina to keep up with the training I'll be giving you after the beach is done. Bardock retorted. Without giving another question, Izuku nodded before making the attempt to leave. Bardock's hand soon found itself on her shoulder as she tried to leave, and looking at the Saiyan man she found his expression thoughtful rather than filled with a hidden rage. Is something wrong, Bardock? Izuku asked, as the man stayed quiet before speaking. A hero came by your apartment earlier today, not sure what her name was. But she wore a very extravagant suit. Bardock said as Izuku thought about it. Did she have a skin-tight suit that could be torn? Izuku asked as Bardock nodded. That was pro-heroine, Midnight. She's also known as the R-rated heroine, mainly due to her SXL innuendos towards villains to catch them off guard. Izuku stated, gushing about the heroine. You sound as though you're a fan of her work. Bardock said as Izuku chuckled slightly. I love all forms of H-heroes, even vigilantes. Izuku said, rubbing her left arm. I see, head home. Your mother should be home now, eat and get some sleep because tomorrow you will be back here and cleaning this beach for the entire day. Bardock said, his tone low. I will, Bardock. Izuku said before walking away. As Izuku walked away from the beach, even though it was a relatively cool day and she'd been rested, Her legs felt oddly inflamed, as though they were still burning from the workout she had just finished, in terms of cleaning the beach, but it was a satisfying burn. Although, that didn't work very well for her thought process, Izuku did also feel a strange burning sensation in her lower back just above her rear. Thinking it was just PBRDY trying to make sure that she could burn more fat to gain muscle, she pumped herself up in order to prepare for the upcoming months up to years for her training. When she returned home, she moved immediately towards the bathroom in order to take a shower. When she was taking off her clothes in the bathroom, she paused in front of the mirror as it showed off her curvaceous body. Large biceps that bounced whenever she moved a bit too fast, thighs that were extremely thick with what appeared to be fat, and hips that were just big enough to be held. All before an ample rear that really stuck out when wearing yoga pants whenever she was walking around the apartment whenever nobody was looking. Staring at her reflection, she couldn't help but feel a bit bad about her appearance. She'd never really liked appearing voluptuous, especially since her mother told her that she would gain her figure from her younger years. And Izuku wasn't really a fan of looking more like one of those American women who had blonde hair and were usually called bimbos by those of the other Americans. She reached a hand to cup her biceps in order to figure out what in the world her life was coming to if she was looking more like a not safe for work version of her mother. She bit her lip as she stared at her reflection, all before that burning sensation came back to her. It was centered in her chest and thighs this time around, seeing as how it made her feel hot. She started the shower and turned on the warm water. By the time the bath was filled, she climbed inside and relaxed within the heated water, letting out a sigh of relief. As she cleaned herself in the bathroom, her mother returned back to the apartment with dinner and a smile on her face as she heard the sounds of the bath from down the hall. A smile came to her face at hearing her daughter's relaxed voice through the hall. And starting on dinner, the mother got right to work on setting up the large protein diet in order to help her child attain the dream she'd always strived for. For the first month of cleaning the beach, Izuku spent most of her time clearing up the smaller items. Mainly those that are small and easy to pick up, but at the same time more difficult to find due to how they could usually get lost within the sand. Over time, those smaller items became larger, such as a tire or barrels filled with ocean water. By the time she reached the refrigerator again, she could barely move it across the ground, giving her the confidence she needed to work harder. For the second month, Izuku was shown being capable of lifting machinery parts that were used for washing-drying machines. Barrels filled with ocean water were oftentimes used for strength training, her just lifting it up from the ground using her entire body. Bardock even had to pull apart some piles in order to give Izuku some more machinery parts to grab and haul across the beach towards the dumpster. All in all, this month of training was focused on improving her confidence. Seeing as how she was still mostly meek and apologetic when she lifted something wrong and Bardock scolded her for it. 3. By the third month, Izuku had noticed a strange thing going on with her body. Normally, when she saw these things happen on HeroTube, people gain muscle and their definition in their body usually within the third month of training. Through strength training, speed training, and many other forms of it. You're supposed to see some kind of muscle definition growing or appearing on your body after months of training. But for Izuku, she noticed that she didn't even have any form of it showing. And Izuku felt as though something had been wrong with her for the past few months since she'd first begun cleaning the beach itself. Her legs and back would always have a burning sensation, but at the same time it would go away at random times before it would come back with a vengeance the next day. She asked her mother about it and they went to a doctor to figure out what it was for, but none of the doctors said that there was anything wrong with Izuku. It was in this month that Izuku had noticed a stark change with herself. More times than not, she would find herself wearing thin clothes within her apartment and she'd feel far happier than normal. But she still wouldn't go outside in this type of clothing, since she was more self-conscious about her body being seen outside of the safety of her home instead of being in her home. It was also where Inko and Izuku had seen another doctor in Hosu. One who specialized in what Izuku experienced with her body and why it wasn't showing any kind of muscle definition in the last 4 months of training. The doctor had stated that because of a disease that wasn't really that dangerous to her overall health, it wouldn't be allowing her body to show the kind of muscle definition she wanted to see after training for this long. The disease she had was called lipedema, where her body wouldn't show any signs of muscular definition. No matter how long she trained her body for, no muscle would ever show itself on her skin, but it could be felt under the skin. The doctor stated that it could go away with time, but they didn't know how long that would be. When they returned back home, Izuku now had a name to call her problem with muscle definition never showing from all the hard work she'd done. When Bardock found out about it, he decided to flatly ignore the problem entirely and continue her training without any fanfare. If she had any inflammation within her thighs, hips, or back, she wouldn't make a problem about it. Bardock would also take note that over time, she would begin to wear more revealing clothing outside during training, bringing a smile to his face. Dagoba Municipal Beach Park, Mizudafu, Japan, 2265. They told me my body was a flaw, a collection of soft lines and quiet failures. But as the last mountain of rusted steel vanished from the horizon, I realized Bardock hadn't been cleaning a beach, he had been clearing a space. I was no longer a girl waiting for a miracle. I was a blank canvas, and I was finally ready for the first slide of fire. For the next 6 months of her life, Izuku cleaned the beach as hard as she could. Even when people were illegally dumping even more trash onto the beach, she went even harder at the cleaning Bardock set her up with. By the time she had cleaned a major portion of the beach, she had managed to lift multiple heavy objects weighing around close to about a ton in weight. She had even managed to pull a small pickup truck all the way to the road and set it in a small pile of the remaining trash as she stood all alone on the beach of Dagoba Municipal Beach. The smile on her face showed that she was excited about having cleared the beach itself. 10 long grueling months of cleaning, 10 long months of constant scolding for carrying things wrong, 10 long months of forcing herself to get over her self-conscious thoughts. And now the beach was clean. The dumpster truck had already come and gone with all the trash she'd collected from the beach itself, and Izuku stared at the ocean water. The horizon showed a bright orange, red, and pink sky with the ocean blue waters constantly splashing on the sandy beach. The salt in the air, the heavy breathing of Izuku provided the backdrop of the scene Bardock arrived at the beach to see. A young woman, now a year older, stood on the beach looking off into the distance with a serene expression on her face. Bardock walked over to Izuku and stood right next to her. Inko was already off to work. And this left the two to stand alone on the beach to take in the scene. "This is what you are capable of when you put your mind to it," Bardock said, voice soft. Do you still not regret killing that teacher?" Izuku asked, looking to Bardock. "I do not have time to regret. The only time I regret my actions is when I am dead," Bardock said, looking to Izuku with only his eyes. "That's kind of dark," Izuku quipped as Bardock moved forward. He continued to walk forward until the rising sun in the distance had covered his form in shadows. When he turned around to look at Izuku, he gave her a stern expression on his face before speaking in a tone that demanded her attention. "From this day forward, you will be learning the basics of power that I have known for the last 40 years of my life," Bardock said before stepping before Izuku. Izuku said nothing until Bardock stood before her. "Know this, Izuku Midoriya. From this point onward, you will wish I had killed you the day you found me," Bardock said, staring down at the young woman. "What do I have to do in order to learn this power of yours?" Izuku asked as Bardock smirked. "Sit down on the ground and meditate. This is the best way for someone like you to learn how I learned on the battlefield. You do not have that pleasure," Bardock said as Izuku nodded and sat down. As she sat on the ground on her knees, Bardock fixed her sitting position into a cross-legged form. Once this was done, Izuku let herself relax for a moment before listening to what he was going to state next for her training. "Now, I want you to look deep within yourself. Search for something that is always there, always present but wasn't able to be activated because you had no clue how to activate it." Bardock spoke, his tone low but prideful. For the next few minutes, Izuku felt the wind brush past her head and caused her hair to flutter. Her eyes remained closed as she tried to visualize this mystical power that Bardock stated was within her, just wasn't activated at this point in time. Underneath her eyelids, her eyes moved in all directions as her vision was filled with a dark outlook that prevented her from seeing anything at all. The only bits of sound she could hear was from the ocean, the waves softly crashing onto the sandy beach and Bardock's breathing as it stood above her not too far away. Bardock watched with his scouter, looking at her current power level. Over the course of the last 10 months, Izuku had gone from a power level of 2 and dramatically increased all the way to a power level of it will continue to grow for the next few days, and he would be there to help her center herself in order to gain that power increase over and over again until she is strong enough to pose a threat to him. He desperately needed a sparring partner who could keep up with him in terms of fighting prowess. He can't continue to train on his own since that wouldn't allow him the greatest gains in strength. There was also the fact that she needed to gain strength and power to take on the entrance exams. Those exams were coming in the next year, and he wanted her to be fully prepared for when she took those exams exactly. But from what he can see, her power wasn't revealing itself at the moment. And as much as he wanted her to realize her ability to use ki, he knew that he would need to focus on increasing her physical prowess in fighting. It would only be a matter of time before she would begin her physical training under the UA Hero Academic University classes. Alright, now that you're searching deep into your body for this power, I need you to focus on bringing this previously unusable power to the surface. Search for something that glows about you. Bardock spoke, his tone soft but still harsh. Izuku followed each and every demand that Bardock wanted of her, searching her soul for this power he spoke of. But no matter what she did, she couldn't even find this supposed power that Bardock saw within her. It wasn't as though she didn't want it. She desperately wanted it. No, she needed it. She just was having trouble finding it since this was the first time she was actively searching for it. Hours would pass by as she struggled to search for this kind of power hidden deeply within herself, and for a few moments she couldn't tell whether or not if she was finding it. You're looking too hard. Calm your heart and slowly search for it. Reach out for the power and just try and draw out a small portion of the power. You have the strength, I know you do. Bardock spoke, as Izuku grunted slightly in affirmation. Over the course of the next hour or so, Izuku would have little to no luck with it. Her expression was slowly giving way to frustration, her mind becoming a raging storm of emotions before she felt herself brought out of her own head when her head was chopped. It wasn't too hard, just light enough to pull her concentration away from trying too hard as Bardock stared down at her with a very concerned but slightly disappointed expression. Finding the power isn't going to be easy, and I never said that you'd find it in a singular day. This takes practice as well as time to do. Don't get too frustrated with it. You'll eventually find it, Bardock said, patting her shoulder. Izuku's hands clenched at her hips as she was pulled up from the sand. When will I be capable of using those energy blasts you used? I'm not sure, but all I know is that when the time comes, I will train you in how to use them properly. Also, do not try and emulate whoever you idolize. It might cause your own destruction. Bardock stated, his voice calm. Yes, sir, Izuku said, looking down in a depressed state. I'm sorry for destroying your chances of making friends at that school. If I could go back and change things, I would, Bardock stated, planting a palm on her shoulder. In a very sarcastic way, Izuku retorted. Oh yeah, what would you change? I would kill the boy who had been the main cause of your terrible school life, Bardock said, his tone low but serious. Izuku stared at him for a moment, her mind racing with the life she could have without Katsuki in her life. She opened her mouth to retort back at him, but she found that her voice wouldn't come out as Izuku stared at Bardock, who willingly watched her. His eyes weren't as sharp or completely disconnected with everything and everyone like they were when he first started to train her. But they had softened a bit to where he could actively see where he was screwing up and helping her in getting better than she really was at the time. Can you teach me how to fight? Izuku asked as Bardock nodded. The two stepped a few feet away from one another, Bardock standing perfectly straight. Izuku entered a combat stance of her own, one where her arms were protecting a good portion of her face and chest. Bardock stepped forward and fixed her stance once more, this time spreading her legs out so that it could create a good center of balance for the young woman. Izuku's face went crimson when his hands touched her arms and his tail moved her legs to the sides, her mind racing from just the soft touches he'd given her in order to prepare her for the fight itself. Bardock entered his own fighting stance, and Izuku realized that his center of gravity was more aligned with the ground. The two stayed separated for a moment, and Izuku clenched her hands into fists, and Bardock noticed how she pushed her thumbs into the ball of her fists. Not wanting her to injure herself, he called out to her. "You want to remove those thumbs away from the inside of your fist. You'll break your hand if you throw a punch like that," Bardock said, before moving towards her. Izuku followed his advice before launching towards him as fast as she could. When the two met in the middle of their own little training ground, Bardock raised an arm just as Izuku moved her fist towards his chest in a bid to land a blow quickly. Bardock's arm blocked the strike, causing Izuku to reel back slightly with a comical expression of pain as she blew on her hand from how hard the man's body was compared to her own. Bardock watched the girl wring out her arm as she glared up at him as he shrugged his shoulders before entering a combat stance again, and she followed suit this time. 0W0. Midoriya family apartment, after fight training. The walk back to the apartment was filled with silence as Izuku slowly limped back home. The training she'd done with Bardock was very informative about how she fought him in her own inexperienced way. The fact that she couldn't land a single blow against the Saiyan man was very demoralizing for her, especially for her very little ego that she had going for herself. She had just been able to move about the city with a small amount of confidence in her posture and with a smile on her face, but after the training session with Bardock it didn't seem as though he were going easy on her. She'd asked him multiple times why he was going so hard on her for their sparring, but he never gave a simple answer. As she thought about what she'd done wrong, she remembered his words at the end of their spar. "Just because you feel powerful doesn't actually mean that you are. You've just reached the first part of your training, and it's just beginning." Bardock spoke to her at the time. Sighing to herself, Izuku continued her walk back home as the sounds of vehicles driving by her was heard. Rounding the corner of the street leading to her apartment, she came across a confusing sight. Police vehicles were sitting outside of the apartment itself, and there were also a few pro-heroes standing outside of where her apartment complex was located. Moving closer to the location, she glanced at the pro-heroes and police who were in the immediate area and looked at the apartment itself, finding that they were just outside her own apartment. Is there a reason you're all standing outside my home?" Izuku asked the nearest hero. "Yes, we're conducting an investigation about the villain who appears to have been here recently," the hero stated, his face unrecognizable. But why are you all here?" Izuku questioned further. "We have reason that those within this apartment complex are hiding the monkey-tailed villain who attacked Aldera High School," the hero stated, his voice and tone low. "All right, can I at least get into my apartment?" Izuku asked as the hero nodded. She went up the stairwell leading to her apartment and found that there were multiple heroes outside her apartment door. Blinking in confusion, she walked over towards the door itself before looking at the other heroes in confusion and building worry. Unlocking the door and entering it, she locked the front door once more before moving towards the kitchen to find her mother standing at the kitchen counter cleaning some dishes. Her mother was so serene when doing those dishes, it was as though she didn't know that there was a raid about to happen to their apartment. Izuku moved over towards her mother and tapped her shoulder. When Inko looked at her daughter, spoke up in a worried tone of voice. "Mom, are you aware that there are heroes outside our apartment door?" Izuku asked as Inko blinked. "Yes, I was informed by Bardock-san that we would be getting a visit from someone. But I'm not sure who it would be," Inko said, as Bardock walked around the corner. "This hero that will be visiting us will be here soon. My scouter is telling me that they'll be in the neighborhood soon," Bardock stated as he walked through the hallway into the kitchen himself. "What hero are you talking about?" Izuku asked, confused. "I'm not exactly sure myself. All I know is that someone influential is coming to this apartment specifically today," Bardock said with a shrug. In hindsight, Izuku should have been far more worried because a few hours later a black sedan rolled in front of the apartment complex. Izuku watched as an elderly woman exited the vehicle and made their way towards the apartment complex itself. The young woman herself, Izuku, had rushed over towards the kitchen where she found Inko and Bardock quietly talking to one another in hushed tones. When she was right next to them, she too asked them a question in a very hushed tone. "Is there a reason as to why the president of the current HPSC is at our apartment complex?" Izuku asked, as Inko just stared at her in wonder. The HPSC President is here? What did you do, Bardock? Inko whisper yelled, grabbing the Saiyan man's ear. I did nothing, woman. Bardock called out. The trio continued to panic slightly as the sound of someone walking down the hall outside the apartment was heard. Once the footsteps outside the apartment door paused for a slight moment, Izuku felt a large amount of fear filter through her veins. The HPSC President was one of the most powerful figures within hero society, just being the actual Japanese Prime Minister in terms of overall power within the country. Anything she said goes, and no matter what you can do, she will figure out a way to make sure you owe her for almost anything that could happen if she says it correctly. Izuku felt her breathing hitch when the sound of knocking was heard on the apartment door. Moving lethargically slow, she made to open the front door when she felt a hand clamp down on her shoulder as though trying to center her. Looking over her shoulder, she found Bardock standing there with her mother to his left. The man gave her a nod of approval before she unlocked the door and opened it, revealing the HPSC President. She stood at a massive 6 feet 5 inches in height and looked very elderly, almost as old as time itself from Izuku's point of view. The woman gave her a raised eyebrow, causing Izuku to let out a hitched squeak. I said that out loud. Didn't I? Izuku mumbled. That in fact you did though. Not many people get away with calling someone like myself old. Consider your situation. Peculiarly lucky that I will not consider destroying your name and reputation for that comment. The HPSC President stated, her eyes giving off a cold vibe. State your business here, woman. I'd rather get through the rest of this day without any form of beating around the bush. Bardock stated, as Inko and Izuku stared at him as though he were about to cause world war. The mouth on this one. I'm surprised that he isn't aware of the level of power I hold. The HPSC President stated with a cold chuckle. My scouter states that you're weaker than the girl, and she's been training as of late. Bardock scoffed as the President chuckled even more. What I hold isn't actual power that I can use physically, it's power that I can use metaphorically. And very literally. The HPSC President said, with a knowing smile. Walking through the front door, the woman made to sit down in the living room. Her eyes raked across the entire apartment, looking at some pictures that had been taken by Inko in the last few months, most importantly noticing how a father wasn't present. The HPSC President's eyes seemed to glow that much more when realizing that a father wasn't even present in the life of the two women before smiling at the trio. I would hate to waste your precious time any further. I believe I have an offer that you probably couldn't refuse. The HPSC President said, with a smooth tone. What is this? Offer of yours? Bardock questioned, standing in front of Izuku. Come join the HPSC, we have full reason to use your abilities to the fullest. You will be given a good pay for the jobs that you will be able to do. You do wish to use your power without restraint, don't you? The HPSC President questioned, her tone heavy. Izuku didn't know what was going on, but she had a feeling that this offer wasn't going to be good for Bardock. The Saiyan, however, noticed the heavy undertone that was underneath the offer itself. And he didn't like being threatened. He took a step forward and opened a palm directly at the woman as she stared at him with a cold expression on her face, not even flinching at the thought that she might die here. Bardock's expression hardened as he kept his palm directed at the woman's face, before a bright yellow-colored orb appeared in his palm as it grew in size. Bardock's expression didn't change as Izuku stared between the HPSC President and Bardock in growing worry. Bardock hasn't killed another person in the last 10 months, but if he does here, then that will mean all the work she and her mother have done to help him would be for nothing. Stepping in front of the HPSC President, Izuku stared at Bardock with pleading eyes as the man stared down at her. His eyes showed a very heavily disappointed expression on his face before he lowered his hand, and if Izuku heard the HPSC President let out a sigh of relief, she didn't voice it. Is there a reason why you threatened my life for a moment there? The HPSC President questioned, an eyebrow raised. I don't trust this offer you're trying to give. Nor do I even want it, so take your offer and shove it up your butt. Bardock stated, before pointing his tail towards the door. The HPSC President had the wherewithal to look a little disappointed with his action. But at the same time, she decided to take her leave, standing up and moving towards the open doorway. As she walked through the doorway, the woman glanced back at Izuku and Bardock specifically with a sadistic grin. I do hope you don't regret your decision today, because from this moment onward, I will make sure to make your journey harrowing. The HPSC President stated, her tone soft but manipulative. I don't care about your stupid threats, woman, leave already. Bardock practically growled as the woman left. With those words stated, the HPSC President left the apartment bringing each and every hero and policeman woman with her. Izuku watched as the black sedan left the area before she glanced over at Bardock, who glared out the window with his scouter beeping every few seconds. Bardock moved to stand next to her before pulling her into a one-sided hug as Izuku felt herself begin to tremble in growing fear as she thought about what that last threat meant. Bardock, however, stared out at the lowering sun in the distance, creating a sunset over the horizon. I need to prepare her for ki and martial prowess sooner than I thought. Bardock thought to himself.